Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. In this video, we're going to talk about what's wrong with apologetics. What's wrong with apologetics? If you enjoy this content, remember we are working on a gift economy here. If you like what you're getting here, you want to see more of this, you can support the channel to get more content like this. We try to stay ad-free. Thanks to everybody who supports us, and to support, links to PayPal and Venmo are in the description below. So we really appreciate everybody who supports the channel. We want to talk about apologetics and epistemology, and I made some comments on one of our previous videos on Calvinism and premature optimization, and something occurred to me. And the whole little segment, I had a segment in there about apologetics, which was probably new information for a lot of you, and it apparently disturbed some people, right? And that's fine. That's fine, because I found it very disturbing myself. On this journey of starting out to find out, I remember right after I came out of Calvinism and my eyes were open to the truth of Scripture, I was immediately overwhelmed with how to articulate what I would need to say in order to prevent people from being deceived like I was. And then what I was seeing in Scripture that brought me out of Calvinism was not the stuff that I was seeing in all the literature that was against Calvinism. So that's what gave me the urge to say something myself. And as I delve further and further into the issue of trying to help with the issue of Calvinism, it gets deeper than that. For whatever reason, people tend to have their own ideology or paradigm, and no matter what the epistemics are behind it, they want to, bear down and, in a rivalrous situation, defend their paradigm, irrespective of the facts. Okay. So when I started off, it was like, well, it's facts versus, I can show that, one way of thinking is factual and another way of thinking is not, or one way of thinking is evidential and their way of thinking is not. And I could do that just fine. That's easy to do with Calvinism. But then what I found is that that's not why. The strength or weakness of facts has absolutely nothing to do with why people buy into ideologies, or almost absolutely nothing to do. Maybe there needs to be something there, but like with some of these issues, there's not anything there. There's nothing there, evidentially or fact-wise, that would cause somebody to become a Calvinist. So what is it, And when you can hands down demonstrate that the text does not mean or say what they need it to mean or say, they double down anyway. I've had people where in a conversation with me, they get to the point where they concede, okay, that verse doesn't say what I thought it meant. And they admit that. And then 2 weeks later, I see them in another forum where they don't know that I'm there too, and they're using the exact same verse to try to bolster Calvinism to somebody else.
Yeah.
Oh. My question is, why do they do that? Why do they do that? In one sense, they concede that something does not say what they thought it did. And in the other sense, they're willing to, once again, go back. As long as they can bolster their paradigm, essentially, they're willing to lie. They're willing to lie.
Yeah.
Say something that isn't true. And my real question is, why is that? So it's not about really the fact. It's not about Calvinism versus biblical Christianity. There's something deeper than that. There's something beyond that. And so then we get into the realm of how the human mind works and why people attach themselves to paradigms and what idea sets look like, and memetics, not mimetics, but memetics, 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 the idea of a meme complex, and it has a central meme, and then there are protector memes and propagation memes and endurance memes, and those are all parts of the narrative that protect the central narrative, that cause people to go out and spread the central narrative. I mean, a meme complex is a whole bunch of ideas that come together. And what is it that gets people to commit to these things? And what is it that gets people tend to prematurely commit to these things, right? And it just dawned on me recently that as I'm delving,
I'm just going to check my audio because I've got nobody watching, and I think I'm probably better off. No offense to you, checking it yourself. Because you get people who probably listen and watch, but they won't tell you whether the audio's fine or not. Oh, it's okay. Look, there you are. Hey. So, it's only a couple of minutes. I'll start it from the beginning.
in this video, we're going to talk about what's wrong with apologetics. What's wrong with apologetics? If you enjoy this content, remember we are working on a gift economy here. If you like what you're getting here, you want to see more of this, you can support the channel to get more content like this. We try to stay ad-free. Thanks to everybody who supports us, and to support, links to PayPal and Venmo are in the description below. So we really appreciate everybody who supports the channel.
Yeah. Kevin's PayPal is kevin@beyondthefundamentals.com. It's at the bottom of the screen there.
We want to talk about apologetics and epistemology, and I made some comments on one of our previous videos on Calvinism and premature optimization, and something occurred to me. And the whole little segment, I had a segment in there about apologetics, which was probably new information for a lot of you, and it apparently disturbed some people, right? And that's fine. That's fine, because I found it very disturbing myself. On this journey of starting out to find out, I remember right after I came out of Calvinism and my eyes were open to the truth of Scripture, I was immediately overwhelmed with how to articulate what I would need to say in order to prevent people from being deceived like I was. And then what I was seeing in Scripture that brought me out of Calvinism was not the stuff that I was seeing in all the literature that was against Calvinism. So that's what gave me the urge to say something myself. And as I delve further and further into the issue of trying to help with the issue of Calvinism, it gets deeper than that. For whatever reason, people tend to have their own ideology or paradigm, and no matter what the epistemics are behind it, they want to, bear down and, in a rivalrous situation, defend their paradigm irrespective of the facts. Okay. So when I started off, it was like, well, it's facts versus, I can show that, one way of thinking is factual and another way of thinking is not, or one way of thinking is evidential and their way of thinking is not. And I could do that just fine. That's easy to do with Calvinism. But then what I found is that that's not why. The strength or weakness of facts has absolutely nothing to do with why people buy into ideologies, or almost absolutely nothing to do. Maybe there needs to be something there, but like with some of these issues, there's not anything there. There's nothing there, evidentially or fact-wise, that would cause somebody to become a Calvinist. So what is it, And when you can hands down demonstrate that the text does not mean or say what they need it to mean or say, they double down anyway. I've had people where in a conversation with me, they get to the point where they concede, okay, that verse doesn't say what I thought it meant. And they admit that. And then 2 weeks later, I see them in another forum where they don't know that I'm there too, and they're using the exact same verse to try to bolster Calvinism to somebody else. My question is, why do they do that? Why do they do that? In one sense, they concede that something does not say what they thought it did. And in the other sense, they're willing to once again go back. As long as they can bolster their paradigm, essentially they're willing to lie. They're willing to lie. Say something that isn't true. And
well, there's no truth in Calvinism, and they would probably call it a holy lie. Holy, holy, holy lies. Yeah. Because that's what Calvinism does to your head. Indeed. Oh, wait. Oh, I'm just checking something on me. Oh. Oh. There it is. There's only 2 watching on Rumble at the moment. Right, let's carry on.
My real question is, why is that? So it's not about really the fact. It's not about Calvinism versus biblical Christianity. There's something deeper than that. There's something beyond that. And so then we get into the realm of how the human mind works and why people attach themselves to paradigms and what idea sets look like, and memetics, not mimetics, but memetics, M-E-M-E.
Yeah, catchword, catchphrases, doctrines of demons. I mean, advertising and all that, most of it's pretty much demonic or satanic, or there's always an undercurrent of, I don't know, brainwashing in it.
Yes, memetics. The idea of a meme complex, and it has a central meme, and then there are protector memes and propagation memes and endurance memes, and those are all parts of the narrative that protect the central narrative, that cause people to go out and spread the central narrative. I mean, a meme complex is a whole bunch of ideas that come together. And what is it that gets people to commit to these things, and what is it that gets people tend to prematurely commit to these things, right? And it just dawned on me recently that as I'm delving down, and now this is starting to include, psychology and cognitive science, and how the human mind works as a processor, and what the human mind drives a person to do, and what motivates a human mind to do certain things. And then you start to learn about in-group stigma and in-group pressure and hierarchical ranking desires and needs and in-group belonging needs, and how those things have more of an influence on what people are willing to attest to or willfully assert. When I say willful assertion, it's the things that you say you're willing to believe. You're willing to say that you believe. Yes, I believe that. You willfully assert it. That doesn't make it any more or less true. So then so it just dawned on me that this whole thing it affects apologetics, and it's just a recent occurrence for me. So you're on this trip with me, okay? I'm trying to bring you on this trip with me as I'm learning as I go. All this.
Oh.
How the mind works, sense making, discernment, wisdom, knowledge, the whole kinds of knowing. I mean, really, this journey of why facts don't matter to people has brought me down this road of trying to figure out sense making and how the human mind interacts with sense making. We're used to thinking about apologetics a certain way, and when I come out and say we're doing apologetics all wrong, it's going to raise some eyebrows, obviously, and it probably should. And I think anytime you hear me say something, don't ever just believe what I say. I want you to think about it and study it out. And maybe there's a lot of noise in there, but maybe there's some signal too. So I want you to conduct sense making on what I say too. Don't just believe everything that I say. After all, I'm just a guy in a polo shirt in Louisiana making YouTube videos. That's really all I am. And that's all you need to see me as. I want you to evaluate the information irrespective of where it's coming from. Just look at the information and conduct your own sense making. So when it comes to the idea of apologetics, Christians have been doing apologetics, and you say, what is apologetics? Well, Christians have been doing apologetics and considering it a certain way for so long that for some guy in a polo shirt in Louisiana with a YouTube channel to come question this thing is kind of alarming. And then even if I make a good point, your mind still wants to go back to how it was. You have something called mental inertia, where if you've been thinking for a certain way for a long time, even when you see evidence for why you shouldn't think that way and agree to it, so there's no problems, no controversy, you're like, oh, I didn't see that. Thanks for pointing that out. Go to sleep a couple times and your mind will revert back to how it was thinking before without you realizing it, okay? It's called mental inertia, where things at rest tend to stay at rest, things in motion tend to stay in motion, and your mind thinking along a certain paradigm or thinking a certain way, it finds its little groove that it likes or that you're used to, and your mind tends to revert back to that. So when you learn something new, like a new way of thinking or a new way of looking at things, aside from the controversy or agreeing to it or whatever, let's say all that's taken care of and you are satisfied that this new perspective is more correct than the old perspective. No problem there. You need to develop some kind of process or discipline to get your mind to think that way all the time. Like you need to engage in it every day, at least a little bit, to cut a new groove for your mind to be in, if you will. There are certain things that like procedurally, I'm in this house. My wife and I are selling this house and we're buying another one. So we each sold our own houses, and then I moved in with her. And there's different processes around here. Like I never used an automatic garage door closer before, and now there is one. So when I would leave, I would accidentally, I know to do it. I have no problem with it. I totally agree that I should close the garage door, but I'm not used to having that as part of my leaving the house process. So I'm driving off and the garage door isn't closed, you know? So it's there's things like that, you know, to where you know and agree that something should be done, but you can't get your mind in that groove. So you have to do it you have to be very intentional about this kind of thing. And that's what I want to do with the area of apologetics. And I think that we have been doing apologetics all wrong. And I want to try to correct that, at least for the people who listen to this channel. We're going to do apologetics better. So let's go to what apologetics is, where it comes from. I'm going to bring up my Bible over here. If you go to first,
I'm not going to apologize for my beliefs. And who I believe in, not a chance. I'm who's watching.
Peter chapter 3. Here's where the idea of apologetics comes from. Bring my notes over there.
From the word.
1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, it says, "But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts." Now what's happening over here is above that in the immediate context. You have people who are willing to harm Christians or persecute them or put them in legal trouble for doing that which is right. And he says, "But if you suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are ye, and be not afraid of their terror, neither be troubled." So if you get thrown in jail for doing the right thing, shouldn't be too worried about that. But people are also going to be asking you questions. So as they're doing that, you know, looking at the overall context of this chapter, he says, verse 15, "Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear." All right. So the answer, that word answer, I'm going to double click on the word answer, and over in your lower right hand side, you're going to get the little Greek for it. Okay. And that Greek word is apologia. It is Strong's number 627. And apologia, where this gets translated as the word answer, is from the same as a plea or to answer for self, a clearing of self, or a defense. And essentially, it is to offer a defense or a semantic justification for what the way it's understood today is for why you believe what you believe. All right. And I've always promoted that myself. You need to be able to explain why. You need to know why you believe what you believe. And I'm going to tell you this. If you don't know why you believe what you believe, then you don't believe it. Okay, because that goes completely against, you willfully assert it. Okay, so what apologetics really is the way it's done today is why what are some good evidential reasons for why you should believe what you willfully assert. That's what's really going on there. So this Greek word that gets translated as answer here really means a defense. Now, I brought this up to somebody recently, and I said apologetics, and it sounds like you're offering apology, like you're telling everybody, "I'm sorry. You know, I offer this without apology," that kind of thing, you know, and it doesn't really mean that. It doesn't mean to tell somebody you're sorry. What apologetics is the study of giving a defense, is really what it is. The study of giving an answer, the study of giving a defense. Now, what the scripture says here is what should that answer be? And here's what I think we should be doing is what the scripture says here, not kind of how it's been convoluted by, you know, Christianity over the past since, you know, some of the church fathers in the patristic period, which are really the church babies.
Church baby.
To give they've been giving a defense of the things that they willfully assert for years and years and years. But what the text actually says is to give an answer. Let me change this here. Is to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason, all right, of the hope that is within you with meekness and with fear. Interesting that the word reason there is the word logos. Okay, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's the same word there. So, every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. Now, what is that? So that gets us to several things. What's the hope that's inside you? What's the meekness and the fear? So let's talk about what apologetics is and what it should be and why I think we should do this differently. Here's in short what I'm going to be saying is that I am in favor and I strongly support doing 1 Peter 3:15, but I'm not in favor of having a separate branch of theology called apologetics that's handled differently than everything else. I think if you do epistemology correctly, then apologetics should be built in as an all-in-one inclusive unit of your theology. You should not have to do apologetics because, after all, if you don't know why you believe what you believe, then you really don't believe it. All right, you willfully assert it. You don't believe it. Let's go to a drawing board here. I'm going to write a fancy word up here, and that is epistemology. If you look up the word faith in the Bible, it is the word pistis, the word faith and believe, and it gets translated as assurance in Acts 17:31. Faith, it's over about 239 times or so, is translated as faith and believe, the word pistis. And the study of how you come to know things is epistemology. In other words, if something happens, how do you know what happens? And sometimes it can be like, how do you know the grass is green? Okay, and you can look at your five senses. But then sometimes things get more complex. Like, how do you know who's really behind the invasion at the White House and the riot? Okay, what is George Soros's involvement in XY, in Occupy Wall Street? Well, that's not so clear, is it? What about global warming? You see, now we're away from something you can touch, taste, and feel right off the bat, and we're into something where maybe you should suspend judgment. So how do you know what you know? And what sources do you trust? When somebody says something, do you just believe what they say? Or do you, we'll talk about assigning confidence levels too. So epistemology, I'm going to draw a little arrow here. Epistemology is going to go this way. All right, and you start with zero facts. Zero facts. You don't know anything, okay? And what you're going to do is you're going to observe. And you're going to collect your observations. And you're going to say, I observe this, I observe that, da-da-da-da. And you're going to have several lines of inquiry. I'm inquiring, okay? What does an inquiry mean? An inquire, to question things, okay? Several lines of investigation and inquiry are going on at the same time. And every once in a while, there's going to be a finding. There's a finding here. I'm still conducting my inquiry, still conducting my investigation. There's another finding here. I still conduct my inquiry, I still conduct my investigation, and then there's a finding here. Now I have three findings, okay? Now, are these three findings enough to synthesize what's going on? I don't know. Let's try it. Let's try to synthesize. Let's talk about what synthesis is, okay? So analysis and synthesis kind of go hand in hand. Analysis is breaking down your facts and sorting them out, finding out when, where, how they happen, what constitutes them, all this kind of stuff. Everything you can find out about the individual components of the things that you have found and observed. It's analysis. What are trends, things like that? How can you put the data together to see if there are any patterns or trends or anything like that? You can analyze it any different way you want to, okay? And you're looking for observances. You're not really trying to decide anything at this point. But synthesis is when you're not sure what's going on, but maybe you come up with an idea and you say, does this idea match the facts? Okay, you're trying to theorize. How did this come to be? For example, who built the pyramids? We don't know. So you try to look at all the data that's available, and you come up with a theory for what matters. So if I told you, here's our three findings. Our three findings is that we have a bunch of men standing around, and one of them's spitting in the dirt, and one of them's scratching himself, and one of them's running, and there's a bunch of other men there too. Now, those are your three observations. What's going on? What's a good synthesis for that? Well, it could be a lot of things, couldn't it? It could be a construction site. Let's say it's a baseball game. Okay, it's a baseball game. You got one guy spitting in the dirt, and then one guy scratching himself, and another guy running. Okay? If I say it's a baseball game, you get an idea in your head. Now, whatever I tell you next is going on, you're going to bounce it off the idea of whether or not it fits with the baseball game. Now, what else might it be? Are you thinking of that? Okay? So I just gave you an idea that it might not. So far, it fits the facts. Now, the more facts that I get, the more you can adjust your confidence level of what you're dealing with. Okay. So if I give you 5 facts, you might be able to synthesize what you think is going on. Oh, this sounds like this is going on. But then I give you 5 more facts. Now you have 10 facts, and the 5 new facts do not all agree with what you synthesized from the first 5. So what do? Do you interpret your original synthesis into the remaining 5 facts and keep your synthesis anyway, your hypothesis anyway? Or do you scratch that synthesis and try to come up with a new one that matches all 10 facts that have been observed? You see? And so our theology, what our theology does is it essentially forms a synthesis of what we think is going on, both here and in the metaphysical world, which is kind of crazy to do that, in my opinion. And and once we spit that out there, like, ooh, it's a baseball game, now we have kind of sabotaged ourselves out of coming up with any better synthesis. And when we find new data, and this is one of the problems with Calvinism, they're so married to their paradigm, which is already figured out for them, that when you encounter new data, there's nothing you can do with it except try to override that data with the paradigm. You know, your paradigm has 3 things that it can do. You can respond to reality, you can modify, or you can it conserves the paradigm, or you can it can be used to resolve dissonance. Okay, and when you resolve dissonance, if you conserve the paradigm instead of better respond to reality, then that's what we call delusion. Okay, so when Calvinism encounters data that does not match the synthesis, the paradigm, the theology, the systematic theology, but it doubles down on the systematic theology anyway, that's what we call delusion. I'm not being pejorative, just that's what the word for it is. So when you come up with, let's say you have a finding now. Let's say you have a good, you come across and you keep doing inquiry and investigation, and now you have a good, solid, something true. A good finding, a good finding recommendation, something that is solidly true based on your observations. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to get used to doing this. Of the things that you willfully assert, and I'm going to write that down. Willfully assert. You say, what does it mean willfully assert? When you claim to believe something that you have not done this process for, you don't really believe it, you willfully assert it. Okay? Open up your statement of faith and just close your eyes and put your finger down on something. And when you open your eyes and look at it, whatever that thing is that you're claiming to believe, you probably just willfully assert it. All right? Let's take the Calvinists who say God ordained all things whatsoever comes to pass. With an eternal decree ordained things whatsoever comes to pass. That's a synthesis that does not meet the facts. They don't believe that. They willfully assert it. And that willful assertion does not make it true. Okay? So when you have something that you believe, I want you to separate it by 2 things. Now we're working on discernment. What does it mean to discern? Number 1, have you actually done the inquiry and investigation behind it? Have you done the epistemics? Have you done the epistemology? Have you done it? Or are you willfully asserting something to be true? And I want you to be honest with yourself. What is the case here? Now, I suspect that a lot of people listening, you probably think that you've done the epistemology behind the things that you willfully assert when you really haven't. And that's one of the problems we want to get to. But what I want you to get used to doing is this. I want you to take the thing that you believe or think you should believe or think that you have discovered through inquiry and investigation and you have decided that it's true for whatever reason. I don't want you to just think of it as being true. I want you to put it in something called possibility space, and then I want you to assign it a confidence level. And that confidence level needs to be based on the direct observations that you have made that pertain to the thing. All right? And the closer you are to 100, the more concerned you should be. Okay? The more concerned you should be. And then I want you to divide these things too down. For example, separate your confidence levels. When you find something that the Bible states is true, remember we talked about axioms before? Realize that everything that comes from the Bible has to first be based on your confidence level that the Bible is true, okay? So separate the things you find in Scripture from your confidence level of Scripture. For example, I have a certain degree of confidence that Scripture is true and it came from God. Now, my next degree of confidence about something that it says is going to be about the intent of that author, not about whether it's true, you see? So when Paul is writing Romans 9, for example, if you're talking to a Calvinist, what is the intent of what Paul is saying here? And now I can have a degree of confidence about what his intent in his writing is. His intent was to spread Gnosticism. I have a 0 degree of confidence that that's what he was trying to do, whereas that's what Calvinists think he was trying to do without realizing it by label. Or I believe that he was expressing how the Jews have some consternation about being hardened and blinded, and salvation being wide open to the Gentiles, and they don't like that. And they are the objector in Romans 9. The Jews are, not the Gentile who didn't get saved. Now, what's my degree of confidence that not that that's true, but that that's the intent of what Paul is trying to say there? You see? So I'm going to separate that out from whether it's true from whether it's the intent, and my opinion of whether it's true goes back to what my axioms about Scripture are. So they could both be 100%, but the point is I need to separate them for epistemic purposes so that you know how the data fits together. So I want you to get used to assigning a confidence level and know what you're assigning a confidence level about. And even if you're reading something false, you can have a 0 degree confidence that what's being said. Say you read something in the newspaper. Like, I have a 0 degree of confidence that this editorial is true, but I have an 87% degree of confidence that the writer was trying to say this. Okay? So you can separate those out. And then you can take a look at why they would do that. Okay? And then what are your degrees of confidence for that? So what we want to do is we want to have a confidence level. And maybe you can do it by percentage up to 100%. Or maybe you can do it by just like a scale of 1 to 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, maybe we'll start with 1 down here. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is your confidence level that this thing is true? Or that this was the intent of what this author wrote? So I want you to think about doing that. Now, when you talk to somebody who's maybe not a Christian, or maybe doesn't see things the same way you do, instead of treating everything like everything's 100% confidence level, you can know what your confidence levels are in advance. And you can have working confidence levels assigned to the things that you're conducting inquiries on as you go. And so when you start the conversation, well, what do you think about the pre-tribulation rapture? Well, I hold that in possibility space, and I have, I give that about a 30% confidence level that that's the truth. And this other view, I hold that, it's probably about a 50% confidence level that it's the truth, but I'm still having ongoing investigation. Now, how do you think that conversation is going to go? Are we going to have a huge argument? We're going to have a huge discussion and a huge debate there. But see, people think they got to hold positions. They think they have to jump to 100% on everything. There's no concept of, possibility space. It's possible that it's this way, but it's possible that it's this way. And my degree of confidence is very low or it's very high because maybe I've done a lot of epistemic research behind it, or maybe I haven't, or maybe I just believe what a lot of people said that I trust. Okay. So don't be afraid to dial back your confidence level. Dial it back. There's no reason to come out guns blazing 100% confidence level on everything that you've decided to willfully assert. So what are we doing so far? We're knowing the difference between things that we're willfully asserting and the things that we actually believe that we've actually done the inquiry and investigation on. Separate those two. We're going to have our findings. We're going to look at synthesis. And then we're going to, when we are aware of positions, we put them in possibility space. Try to avoid putting anything at 100% if you can. And you want to assign things a confidence level. So it could be, like I see a lot of people online right now, at least in the groups that I see, they want to talk about eternal security and OSAS and all this kind of stuff. Maybe instead of taking a 100% position in one way or another, maybe you can have degrees of confidence, or maybe you can have degrees of confidence about what the intent of each author is in each particular passage. Okay, but it's pretty obvious that when people talk about this, their mind is already made up, and they're giving you a post hoc rationalized, semantic argumentation for why the thing means what you think it means. So now let's look at what apologetics does. So remember, up here we've done what we're hoping we've done. We hope we've done all this work up here to get to whatever the thing is that we believe, whatever doctrinal thing that you think you've got going on, whatever it is you think you believe. Hopefully you've done that work behind it. Okay. And so we're looking at confidence levels, possibility space. You know the difference between whether you are willfully asserting it or whether you have a good enough reason to believe it. You don't want to willfully assert. You're prematurely committing to something without a proper epistemic basis for doing so. Okay, that's when you willfully assert something. So we want to have, before we say we believe something, we want to have a proper epistemic basis for doing so. All right, so what does apologetics do? Apologetics, we got our arrow down here again. Epistemology should be going that way. You're starting with your observations, and then you start to put them together to try to figure out what the perspective is, right? That's what you should be doing, but apologetics doesn't do that. I'm going to write this down here. I'm going to draw this line. Let me draw this line, separate this stuff. Now we're dealing with apologetics. Not what apologetics should be, but as it's done today. And what apologetics does is this. They give you your fact, your belief to start with. Do you see a problem there? Has any inquiry been done? Has any investigation been done? No. That's your assigned belief. There you go. Here's what we believe. Thanks for joining XYZ Church. Here's what the XYZ Church believes. Now, what do you got to do? Well, you've done that work behind it. Okay. And so we're looking at confidence levels, possibility space. You know the difference between whether you are willfully asserting it or whether you have a good enough reason to believe it. You don't want to willfully assert. You're prematurely committing to something without a proper epistemic basis for doing so. Okay, that's when you willfully assert something. So we want to have, before we say we believe something, we want to have a proper epistemic basis for doing so. All right, so what does apologetics do? Apologetics, we got our arrow down here again. Epistemology should be going that way. You're starting with your observations, and then you start to put them together to try to figure out what the perspective is, right? That's what you should be doing, but apologetics doesn't do that. I'm going to write this down here. I'm going to draw this line. Let me draw this line, separate this stuff. Now we're dealing with apologetics. Not what apologetics should be, but as it's done today. And what apologetics does is this. They give you your fact, your belief to start with. Do you see a problem there? Has any inquiry been done? Has any investigation been done? No. That's your assigned belief. There you go. Here's what we believe. Thanks for joining XYZ Church. Here's what the XYZ Church believes. Now, what do you got to do? Now you hear, we Christians, we need to know why we believe what we believe. Well, I just got handed this sheet of paper and they've been told what I'm supposed to believe. So now how do I go defend this? And then people feel overwhelmed. They feel like, I can never learn all this stuff. I didn't learn. So what are they going to do? For those who do take it up, what they're going to do is they're going to go backwards. Now they take the belief here, they're going to start going this way. And they're going to start doing their inquiry backwards. And what is that called? That's called prejudice. There's no other word for it. There's no other word for it. Maybe there is another word for it, but that's the word. That's the correct word. It's prejudice. Prejudice. Now I have a finding. Now what's happening here? Cognitive bias is what's happening here. That's cognitive bias. You do not want me to be your kid's spelling teacher. Okay? Cognitive bias is what's going on. Why do we have cognitive bias? Because we were given something that framed our mind, a mental framing. Remember, like the synthesis of the baseball game? We have a mental framing that's handed to us in advance. And we have in-group pressure not to see whether or not that's true, but to be able to find, articulate, and repeat, and formulate, articulate, and repeat answers that bolster why it's true. What if it's not? Okay. So what you have here, you don't have a fact, you have a willful assertion. People think that they can willfully assert something strong enough and that makes it true. Okay. I willfully assert that Antifa did XYZ. I willfully assert that Trump supporters did XYZ. Does that change the facts of what happened? No, it does not. It is not an epistemically sound thing to do. So you need to recognize when you are willfully asserting something. So apologetics has you conducting epistemology backwards. And then what is that? If you have an idea in advance and you go back to the evidence and you try to make the evidence, you interpret the evidence in such a way that bolsters the idea that you had in your mind when you started, that's called eisegesis, okay? Eisegesis. We do not want eisegesis. What do we want? We want exegesis. I'm going to write this up here. Exegesis. Exa, taken out of. Exegesis means to take something. And so I read the text, I have nothing in my mind, and I extract the meaning from the text, okay? I put the text through a process of questions and inquiry, and I extract meaning from the text, and the only meaning I get is that which the text provides and nothing more. And I have to have a very disciplined, detailed process on purpose designed to exclude the nothing more from my interpretive process. I don't want any ideas from outside. I just want the evidence to be allowed to speak for itself. And so I really have to, and some of that stuff isn't as intuitive as it sounds. And so I really have to be very careful and disciplined that my own thoughts and my own beliefs and my own willful assertions don't creep their way into what I think I'm pulling from the text, okay? And that is a skill. Exegesis is a skill. You can't just learn what exegesis is and do it, because what happens is when you learn what it is and you start practicing it, you wind up doing it with a lot of beliefs built into what you are thinking you're pulling out of the text, but you're actually putting things in the text. So when you first start doing exegesis, you're really doing eisegesis without realizing it. So there is I'm not saying that's like bad or evil or anything. It's just a skill level thing. It's just like how you're not very good at a sport when you first try. That's just how it is. And so what we do is eisegesis. We have the idea in advance, and eisegesis is to place into. Instead of to draw out of, it's to place into. We have ideas in our mind, and we envision a world where the idea that was in our mind is also what's represented in the text. And you start to see it that way, and you can't see it any other way. And that's not good, right? We don't want to do that. But the way we've done apologetics is that's what happens. I want to go to school to learn how to defend my faith. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Why would you need to do that? Why would you need to do that? Think about that. Okay? If you need to go to school to learn apologetics, what that means is you need to backwards fill in the facts for the things that you willfully assert and assigned a high degree of confidence to without an epistemic basis for doing so. And you're going to backfill all the inquiry with facts that are eisegetically interpreted to support the finding that you started with. That's circular. It's inherently circular. You're not finding anything. You're not learning anything. You're adding a whole bunch of semantic propositional data to something which may not be true, and you're deceiving yourself in the process. So let's look at this word up here. I'm going to write this word. Persuasion. People think that apologetics is about persuasion. They think that if you do apologetics good, you can either win a debate and satisfy some kind of crowd that your side of the facts was right, or you can persuade individuals either directly or third parties that hear an interaction with you and another individual. You can say things that persuasively get people to willfully assert the propositions that you think are true, the propositions to which you have assigned a high degree of confidence, with no regard for the fact that you assigned a high degree of confidence without a proper epistemic basis for doing so. Okay? So you think persuasion. People talk about, what are we going to tell the lost? What are we going to tell our children? Things like that. Our job is not to persuade. Look at 1 Peter 3:15. Look at it. Do you see persuasion in there? I don't see persuasion in there. You can keep going, having a good conscience, that whereas they speak evil of you as evildoers, they may be ashamed that falsely accuse your good conversation in Christ. Now look at that. Not the facts that you brought, not the argument that they can't answer. The ability to produce a good argument has really nothing to do with whether or not something's true. If you're good, you can shield people's eyes from what's true. And then, for is it better, if the will of God be so, that you suffer for well-doing than for evil-doing? Notice the doing. Notice the conversation. The doing here, well-doing, evil-doing. It's doing. It's not believing. It's not willfully asserting. It's not high degrees of confidence to propositions. It's doing. Conversation. What is the conversation? It's the way you live. The way you live is your conversation. And we think that apologetics is designed to deal with the lost, and it's designed to deal, somebody said, what are we going to do with the lost and with our children? What are you trying to do with your children? What do you think the goal is? You're trying to persuade them a list of propositions? Here's what I think you ought to do. Let me go back to my little drawing over here. I have this theory. We just teach people to do this. Let me get a different color over here. Pick this little red color here. It's maroon something color. We teach people to do this. We will not have to spend a lot of time trying to persuade or convince them of anything. We teach them a process. We show them a process. And if you teach your kids what sound epistemology is, now if you've conducted, say you believe point A, whatever point A is, and you have investigated and done an inquiry on this for a year. Now, when somebody asks you, now you believe this thing, and you have a 95% degree of confidence that this thing is true. Now, when someone comes up and asks you about it, do you need to go to school to learn how to defend that, or to learn how to give an answer for that? And if that thing, when it's reduced to its propositional form, if that thing gives you hope, do you have to learn how to defend it? Absolutely not. You have already done the inquiry on it. Okay? So you do not have a need to defend propositions that have been assigned to you. That's not how it works. You are only to be ready to give an answer for the hope that is in you, not for propositions that have been assigned to you. What's the hope that's in you? How are we going to deal with that? We'll talk about that. But what I want to get to you is that if we teach people this, and like, even when you're someone talks to you about your Christianity, say they're an atheist, you don't have to really defend a bunch of propositions. Just take them on your journey back to first principles thinking, back to your axioms, okay? And then we're going to talk a second about your experience and witnessing and what that means, okay? But just take people on the same journey you went on. Here's the story. I believe XYZ thing, and here's the story of how I can just tell that story, okay? And if you teach people Christianity in the way where they are not expected to be accountable for things that are outside their domain of experience, then it removes the stress and the daunting feeling of having to be able to answer for all these propositions that they're supposed to believe but haven't actually done the epistemic research for. So what we want people to do is know where they are and just talk about that. What's your story so far? How did you meet Christ? What's that journey been like? What is Christianity to you? Can you say that? Can you experience that? And if there's not much to say, that even makes it easier. Just say what you have to say. And then keep doing your investigation, keep doing your inquiry. Keep adding to your story every day, consciously and intentionally. Okay? Get to know this Christ. Now we're going to have to erase this. And I'm going to have to write some other things down here. So back to this cognitive bias thing down here. What we're doing with apologetics is we're essentially reverse engineering epistemology. And you can't reverse engineer epistemology. It has to be organic. It has to start from the proper axioms and move forward. And when you are conducting epistemology, like we talked about in our last video that was not an FSI video is called Calvinism and Premature Optimization. In that video, we talked about going back to your base axioms. And what you want to do is you want to have as few axioms as possible and start your sense making from there. What are the fewest number of things that I have to assume before I start conducting my sense making? And it can go all the way back to something simple like I'm alive, my brain works, the universe is consistent enough to where if I study it and get results, those answers matter and they correspond with reality. Those are axioms like that, okay? You can go all the way back to that. And that's where you want to start. So you want to get the most basic level axioms and as few axioms as possible. Well, in apologetics, you're not going from the axioms. You've been handed this doctrine, which is a finding, which somebody else is finding. Somebody else wrote a statement of faith. Somebody else did the biblical interpretation and all that. And who knows how sound that process was or how deceived they were or weren't. Who knows? Nobody knows. But you're just handed the finding. Now, that's when you do your investigation from there, that is essentially now one of your axioms, and it is way too complex of an axiom and way too far removed from where an axiom should actually be, way over on the left, way far to the beginning. Simple axioms. And the three axioms we pointed out were God exists, the Bible came from God, and the Bible's true. Or the Bible's true thing could go with God or the Bible. Like God exists, God is truthful, it communicates with humans, and the Bible is a record of that communication. Something like that. Those are the basic axioms where you want to start, and you don't want to add anything to that. Anything added to that is too much. So you want to go back before that. And what apologetics does, the way we've done apologetics, is you don't start with the basic axioms and do sound epistemology. You give people some very advanced finding, which, if it's true, should have been discovered through the processes of correct epistemology and biblical hermeneutics, et cetera, and so forth. But now you have this thing influencing, and you don't even know how it's influencing you, but it is influencing your backwards reverse engineering epistemology, where you go to check it out to see if it's true or not. It's influencing, and it may have a negative influence. Maybe it's true, but you don't like the person who said it first, and so you're bound to determine to prove it wrong. Okay, maybe that's the case. Some people say, well, maybe you did that with Calvinism. Well, I was a sucker for Calvinism. I was trying to prove it right. That was my problem. So what are the things, let me go over my notes here before we get into the next verse I want to show you. We talked about reverse engineering, confirmation bias, having a confidence level, assign degrees of confidence to things. Okay, now this whole idea of always tell the truth or at least try not to lie. That's one of, if you read Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules, this first book, you get that, not his first book he wrote, but the first 12 Rules book, because another one's coming out, I think, in March. He says, always tell the truth or at least try not to lie. And he expounds on that. Now, as a Christian, you would think we've always practiced this and believed this and taught it, but really with the way we do apologetics, we absolutely do it the other way around. So he goes on to explain this as when you take someone else's ideas, and not just ones that they've generated creatively, but someone else's findings, and you just repeat them, but you haven't done the epistemic work, and you just repeat it as if it's true, that's the same thing as lying, and you're lying to yourself. And that really struck me hard. I think I've even got a couple of videos on this. Actually, I got a video where my wife, the first time she came on the channel, we talked, it was a video called Lie Not One to Another, and how when we repeat things that we haven't verified or haven't properly verified, we're essentially lying. Even if you repeat something that just happens to be true, but you haven't done the proper epistemic work behind it, it's the same thing as lying. You do not have a proper basis for being the person to say this thing. Now, what you could say is this: politician so-and-so and so-and-so said XYZ, and I have about a 40% confidence rating that that's true without having done any research myself. Why not say that? See, that's a truthful statement, because you're saying where it came from. You're saying what the confidence level is, and you're admitting that you haven't done any epistemic research behind it. Okay. Well, I find this idea interesting. So-and-so put it forth, and you source it, tell people where it came from, and don't feel like you have to assign 100% degree of confidence to it and that you have to defend that. Okay. Remove the burden from yourself of defending things that you don't know to be true. And when you assign that burden to yourself, you are lying and you're not telling the truth. And what that does for you, it makes you weaker. Now that is an insight that I would not have expected and did not realize until I meditated on this for a while. Another way he says this is only say things that make you stronger. Okay. And that would be only say things that you can properly say and have a proper basis for saying. And since I've heard this and studied this, I've put this to the test and I've tried to use it for discernment. And whenever I say something that I don't have a high degree of confidence in, I feel icky. I feel something weird going on and I don't like it. And so I'm calibrating my senses with discernment for how my own body is and how something feels. And I've become more sensitive to that the more I've practiced this. And then when I say something that I think that I have a high degree of confidence for, a proper basis for a high degree of confidence, it does make me feel stronger and more powerful, not in a prideful, egotistical way, but in a solid, sure footing kind of way. And it gives confidence. Okay. So telling the truth, at least try not to lie. The way we do apologetics today, it essentially has people deceive themselves as to what the truth is, and they deceive others, and they tell lies, and they make themselves weaker in the process. So we don't want any of that to happen. I already talked about epistemic directionality, how we want our inquiry to be going this way. We don't want it to start with something and go back this way. So epistemic directionality should be starting from proper axioms and building up your observations as you go. And by the way, you don't necessarily have to take a position on things. You know that? You can just have a list of observations and suspend judgment. I know that these 8 things have happened. I'm not sure what it means. and I don't have a degree of confidence about how they synthesize or what they mean, but here's kind of what I'm dealing with. Say what you see. Share your perspective. And what apologetics does, it suppresses your perspective, and one of the most valuable things that you have for the sacred infinite to shine through you so that other people can see it through you. One of the most valuable things that you have is your own perspective. And what statements of faith and in-group pressure and the way we've done apologetics does to people, it causes people to suppress their own perspective in favor of a unified perspective. So now there's only one perspective. They suppress their own perspective in favor of a unified perspective. In the meantime, they reduce all four kinds of knowing down to just propositional knowing. They outsource their sense making to the group, and they don't exercise discernment. And what you're doing is you're having a monolithic type of Borg formation where nobody is conducting any sense making or doing any, they're not practicing discernment or gaining any skill in discernment, going from milk to meat. None of them are doing that. So yeah, everybody's unified in what they're saying, but they're all stupid and nobody's going to be wise. Nobody will turn into a wise person in that environment. You have to exercise discernment, and you have to be able to articulate your own perspective. What is it that you see? You have to be able to say that, okay? And when you are trying to teach people what to say, that suppresses that. And you prevent that person from the opportunity to become a wise person. You're depriving them of that opportunity. What I want to do now is take you on another approach to apologetics, which I think is a much better approach, and it's more epistemically sound, and it will stop us from feeling the pressure of having to defend things that we can't possibly know the truth of, like list of proposition sets that comprise a statement of faith. And then when Christians are busy trying to do that, assigning high degrees of confidence for which there is no proper epistemic basis, outsiders can see that stuff easily. They can read it on our faces that we have no clue what we're talking about, and they think that faith is something that you can, like, we make truth against evidence with faith. That's what they think that we think we do, and we have to turn the tide on that. That's not what faith is about at all. Okay, and our apologetics needs to be, let's try to guide it, I think, by something Jesus said. I think this is very helpful. Jesus said this. Now let me go over here. I'm going to put 1 Peter 3:15 in the small right-hand corner over on the right-hand side of the screen. So you got 1 Peter 3:15 over here. All right. And up here I've got John 7:17. And Jesus said in John 7:17, if any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, and whether it be of God or whether I speak of myself. Okay. In other words, it's like a try it and see kind of thing. You ever watch one of those commercials for a product and they say, hey, you got a 30-day free trial. You have a 6-month free trial. You got a 1-year free trial of this thing. And if you don't like it in 1 year, or you don't like it in 30 days, you can send it back risk-free, get all your money back, full refund, that kind of thing. It's something like that, where you could watch this commercial and I could show you all these demonstrations for why this product is good, but here's what's really going to sell this. Try it. Okay. Now that really ties in, it really resonates with me with 1 Peter 3:15. Be ready. What's the reason of the hope that lied within you? And this, in our last video, we talked about witnessing. And when in Western Christianity, in evangelical Christianity, we think of witnessing as, sharing the gospel. We think of it as evangelism. And it can be, but it's more basic than that. And witnessing is, let's take it to its courtroom definition of what it is. You need to stop thinking of witnessing as trying to persuade people of proposition sets that your in-group thinks are true, and start thinking of witnessing as simply telling the story of what you have experienced. What is your perspective on what you have experienced with Christ? Don't word it. Don't do virtue signaling and change your narrative to dress it up with words that you think your in-group will approve of. that the Baptist pastor and the seminary professors don't, and the Sunday school teachers and the nice ladies in the WMU club don't change your story to make it something that they would smile and nod and approve of. Don't do that. But really get down to the heart of what exactly is your experience with Jesus Christ. Have you tried Jesus Christ? Have you tried it out? Have you tried, let's do his will. Let's open up the Bible and see what it says, interpret it properly, and try to apply that. Let's try to live that, and let's see how that goes, okay? And after you see how that goes, just talk about that. Witness it. And you say, what's the witness? What's your experience? What did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel? What did you taste? Be careful with that one, okay? But what did you witness? How did it go for you? Tell that story. Can you tell that story? And that's when it comes to being ready to give an answer to every man that asketh the reason of the hope that is within you with meekness and fear. Can you tell your story of what you have experienced with Christ? You don't have to come up with you don't have to have long flowing explanations for why XYZ doctrines are true or why different things. All you have to do is tell your story. I tried to do the will of God for 30 days, and here's what happened. I tried it for 6 months, and here's what happened. Can you do that? I think that'd be pretty easy. And that's, you only talk about what you tried. You only talk about what you've experienced. When someone asks you about, well, what about the doctrine of XYZ? So that's very interesting. I've heard about that. I've, not come across that in my experiences so far, but, so I can't give you a confidence rating for how I feel about it. But here's what I know happened to me when I tried to do the will of God. Here's what happened. Tell that story. And you might be surprised that story, when you start to articulate that story, it might not go how you think it should. It might not. When you just add up your story, it could be a list of bad things. I try to do the will of God, and now those bad things might not be because you might have been doing the will of God wrong. You might not have been growing in wisdom, but growing in propositions. You think you're doing the will of God, but when you went to a church, it's just giving you a bunch of rules, and they don't understand transformation whatsoever. So when you're trying to do the will of God, you want to really be trying to do the Romans 12:2 transformation and the Ephesians 4 edification and the Hebrews 5 discernment. You want to try those things, okay? And the wisdom that the most of the people in 1 Corinthians 2 and 3 were lacking, but get a hold of that and aim for that and strive for that and realize that following Scripture, trying to follow Christ through what is revealed in Scripture can bring those things about. Now, if I'm following Jesus, if I'm doing the will of God, and what we're going to get to now is what I might call a gospel for atheists. And I might do a separate video on this or separate this portion out, but a gospel for atheists. What's a gospel for atheists? Let's take the will of God and let's abstract out what the will of God is as per Jesus Christ. What did Jesus Christ do? He took on responsibility for things that were not his fault. So can you do that? Can you take on responsibility? And you start with things that are yours to do immediately, okay? And one of the things Jordan Peterson says, clean your room. Can you do that? What can you do? What can you take on responsibility for to make your life a little bit better now than it was before? Some people come up to me with questions and problems all the time. And one guy recently was like, there's a problem with drugs, addiction, porn, sexually aberrant behavior, all kinds of stuff like that, okay? And it seems overwhelming, but what can you take responsibility? Just one little thing. What can you take responsibility for right now that makes one thing better? Can you change one habit? Can you start making your bed when you wake up? Okay. Can you fix that one broken shoelace? I mean, just take one little thing at a time and start taking responsibility to change one little thing at a time. And then you're going to circumambulate that effort as you start getting control of the things that you can take responsibility for in your own life, you're going to start branching out and maybe you can take responsibility for something that helps somebody else, like that maybe isn't your fault. Okay, Jesus took on the sin of the world and he's not a sinner. That is the ultimate example of taking on responsibility for something that isn't your fault. Like maybe you were wronged, maybe you were betrayed, maybe you owe a lot of money, maybe you spent a year in jail, and maybe you got wrongfully accused. But when you take responsibility, even for something that isn't your fault, and you try to make it better anyway, this is the hand I've been dealt. What's the best that I can do with this? Now, Viktor Frankl talked about doing this in the concentration camps in Germany during World War II. What can you do? What is mine to do? What can I do? What can I take responsibility for to make this the best that it can be, or at least better than it is now? What can you do for that? Abstract it in that way. And like one example, you see people go out on the web. You see people posting pictures sometimes on Instagram and other places where they've gone out to a very trashy area and they've cleaned up all the trash. And you see them they show a picture of the very dirty area, and then they show a picture of the people standing around, and it's just trash bags now. And so, excuse me, I got an itch. And so now the area is very clean, and it wasn't their fault though. And they went and took responsibility for it. So can you do something? Because there's something you can do where you can broaden your scope of responsibility. Now, when you do that, when you take responsibility for it, there is a cost that comes with it. Now, the ultimate cost, for Jesus, it cost him his life. Now, what's the cost going to be for you? If you clean your room, it might cost you 10 minutes. It might cost you 30 minutes. It might cost you an hour, okay? Whatever you take responsibility for is going to have some cost that comes with it. If you go clean up the trash on the side of the road, that might cost you an hour of your time, okay? So there's cost that comes with it. So your willingness to bear the cost of the responsibility that you take. And then the pattern of what Jesus did after that, he rose from the dead and then affected a whole bunch of people, which the abstraction of that for us would be that after you take responsibility and you're willing to bear the cost that comes with that responsibility, the result on the other side of that is increased agency in the arena. Okay? That's a proverbial rising from the dead, if you will. The cost is like a death, and then the increased agency is like a resurrection. That's the pattern. Take on responsibility, bear the cost of that responsibility, and then you have increased agency in the arena to continue taking on responsibility, bearing the cost of that responsibility, and having increased agency. If you keep doing that, if everybody in the world was doing that, what would the world be like? I think it would be a much better place. Now think about this. Jesus says, taste and see. Or if any man, I think Psalm says, taste and see that the Lord is good. Jesus says, if any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, do his will. So here's the gospel for atheists. Atheist, any atheist with a sound mind who's been around for a minute and a half can recognize that that pattern is a good pattern. And maybe you don't believe the Bible, maybe you don't, for whatever reason, maybe you don't believe in the God that exists in the minds of Christians, okay? Well, let's give a different God a shot, okay? And let's just try this. The highest level of responsibility that you can take on, the ability to bear the cost of it, and increased agency in your arena to do good things. Can you commit yourself to that? Okay? Atheist. And that's maybe your apologetics as a Christian. Maybe that's something that you can say, and that's something you could try first. Okay? As a Christian, try that. Try to follow that pattern. And then have a story with it. Hey, when I tried to do the will of God, when I tried to take on increased responsibility like Jesus did and bore the cost of it like Jesus did, but to a smaller degree, I had increased agency. And here's what that looked like. Tell that story. And maybe after you tell your story, you could ask the atheist a sobering question and be like, don't you think it's worth at least trying that pattern? And maybe if everything else is false in the Bible, maybe that pattern's true. And maybe it can not only make your life better, but everybody's life better. And then maybe you can get somebody to the point of, let's try the edification pattern of Ephesians 4:13 through 16. And maybe you can take that pattern into like a tech business somewhere And you can design some amazing technology because of that edification process, which that's how a lot of tech companies are doing it these days. All right, a lot of the sense making and distributed cognition that's happening, like the stuff they were trying to do at the Santa Fe Institute and the Game B stuff that some of those guys are talking about, all that stuff is right there. It's been right there in Ephesians 4 for almost 2,000 years. And these guys are acting like it's revolutionary, like it just came around. Well, if you could do that, try that. Take your business and try that edification model for how to generate creativity and share perspective and grow people to be have more agency and be more productive and effective, and see how that works. Try that out. Try that. Try to exercise discernment. So try these things. And so you want to have things in the Bible that you're actually trying yourself, that you will have, after you try, you will have a story to tell. And then when you're talking to somebody, you say, I'm not trying to convince them of a list of propositions of things that they should willfully assert as true. And that's not my measure of success. My measure of success is if I can tell the story of what happened when I tried to do the will of God. Okay? I took him at his word. I just took the risk. I bought the product on TV for a money-back guarantee for 30 days. I tried it. What else have I got to lose? I'm going to die one day anyway, and this is supposed to make things, it's supposed to be in the right direction. It's what the book claims, so let's try it out and see what happens. and then tell that story. And that could be your 1 Peter 3:15. Be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear. Can you do that with your own experiences? So that's what I want. That's what I think apologetics should go toward, not learning to defend a bunch of propositions that are handed to you, but simply just doing 1 Peter 3:15, where you simply answer in a witness format of what your story is, what your interaction with God is. My interaction with God is this. I tried to do his will. Here's what happened. Tell that story. That's your apologetic. I have hope in Christ because when I tried Christ out, he proved himself to be true in these 15 ways. Okay? Now remember, stay away from virtue signaling. Don't say what you think somebody at church would be pleased to hear, or that something that would bolster your attachment to an in-group. Don't do that. So a comment that I have here is that the old style apologetics gives you semantic justifications that bolster propositions, and they give you answers that actually take you away from the perspective of what you have actually witnessed. What did I just say there? You have your own perspective. And that's what you should be talking about. That's what you should be sharing. And that's going to create a reciprocal opening with other people. They share what they have experienced. You share what you have experienced. That's what lies within your group when you're talking with them. Your actual experience, not a dressed up virtue signal version of it, but your actual experience. And good, bad, and the ugly. Just tell what you really experienced. And they're going to tell theirs. It's going to be some reciprocal opening there where you're going to get to know each other. You're going to develop some affinity for each other and that kind of thing. And that's good. But you don't want to, and you miss out on that reciprocal opening with other people when you replace your story and your perspective. That, you could have a reciprocal opening with other people where you come like this. But when you start to supplant that story of yours that's really yours for a list of propositions that you now have to defend because you willfully asserted them prematurely with no epistemic basis for doing so, you start to close that off. And now you're trying to persuade something of somebody that you think they should be persuaded of for bad reasons. And they can tell, and there is a lack of genuineness there. They can tell. It's like this guy has switched off from being himself, and he's now switched over to the salesman for XYZ product. You got that person who does multi-level marketing. You got that friend who does Amway or does Pampered Chef or Tupperware or sells 31 or doTERRA or Mary Kay or those kinds of things. And you know that every time you see them, you're not going to get your friend that you thought you knew. You're going to get a sales pitch for what they think. And so it's impersonal. It's fake. It's a facade. it's not pleasant. Nobody likes that. You don't want Christianity to become that for people. Okay? The thing that people start trying to avoid you because they know you're constantly trying to sell them on this, meme complex product that you think everybody needs to be convinced of. Change and go toward being what a Bible Christian should be. Try the will of God. Try it out. When you try it, develop a story to tell. And then when you have that story, be ready to tell it when people ask you, what's the reason for the hope that lies within you? I've tried God out on these things and look what happened. So why not try him out for things on the next world too? Now that's a gospel anybody I think can get behind. So you don't have to accept, I really don't think you have to accept all of Christianity in one big gulp and one big lump sum, but I think that you can try him out. You can have an atheist try Jesus out for a while and maybe they get saved later. But you got to start somewhere. Okay. So here's the drawing over here. And maybe I'll post a screenshot of this somewhere. But apologetics needs to be done differently. And that's the point of this video, why we did this video. And if you remember, we're talking about epistemology, and apologetics is a direction to do epistemology backwards. So we talked about willful assertions versus what you actually know. And we talked about putting things in possibility space, assigning confidence levels to what you know, not feeling the pressure to support something and defend something as if you have to assign 100% confidence level to everything in your statement of faith. Don't do that. Just start with your own experiences. Just start with what you know. Conduct epistemology in the correct direction and only talk about the things you have actually observed and found. Only do that. Try to avoid cognitive bias. Try to avoid deceiving yourself. Try to avoid not being genuine and fake with people. You're not trying to persuade them of a set of doctrines or anything like that. You're just relating to people. Just be there. Tell your story. They got their story. You got yours. Be yourself. All right. So our goal is not persuasion to a set of propositions for other people. What we would want to do, like with your children, with other people, we want to take them back to first principles thinking and make sure they know how to do that. And maybe if you're going to persuade people to do anything, maybe at least get them to try out some of the will of God and see how it works in their life or in their business or in something else like that. See how it goes. All right. So 1 Peter 3:15 is you witnessing your own story, not generating a whole bunch of post hoc rationalizations for somebody else's findings. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you, and good day.
Avoid pre-sup. I wonder what he's up to. He used to stop with his cylinder. He just waited in on for the last 10 minutes. 41 minutes. Hello, Cheryl. How are you? How are you? This is the video I'm playing next. After a quick message to Cheryl. I hope you're well. Had a good day and things. There we go. See if Cheryl's still there. Are you still there, Cheryl? Oh, she's gone. Oh, it says Theo. Hello. Eric doesn't believe that Jesus Christ is the Alpha and the Omega. I don't know if you saw me at my latest short. Yeah. Oh well, I'm going to play this now.
Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. In this video,
It's called World War Z, Transformation, Romans 12, verse 2, KJV.
we're going to do something a lot different than what we usually do. We're not going to deal strictly with Calvinism. We're not going to do any of that. What I do want to do is dig into a movie review because of how timely it is. We've been talking in our series Awakening the Spirit. What we're doing on 6:30 in the morning is once a week. If we can meet once a week, sometimes we don't meet. We've been talking about transformation, and last week we had a discussion of the transformation of the individual and transformation of the group. In other words, how do we get the body of Christ into an Ephesians 4 model? That transformation, coupled with, I've been talking about having an aim lately, and that aim is the ideal that you should aim for, the ideal that you should have in mind, that you should strive for. Somebody recently said that an ideal in your life is an infinitely renewable resource of identity construction. And I thought that was a great way to word that. So we're looking at the transformation, what to do, and it can be hazy or foggy to say, what is it? I'm looking at Romans 12:2, the word transform in Romans 12:2. What I'm looking at is, what can I aim for to behave like that is something that is right? And one thing you want to be able to do when you transform into something, and when I talk about this, I am by no means claiming to have achieved anything or be transformed. I just want to clear that up right away. So it's not like that at all. What I'm saying is that each one of us, no matter how much you've changed anyway, there's always still some change to go. I mean, none of us are in the image of Christ yet, right? So of this transformation, there is a practical transformation. And one thing you could think of it as is, as you want to behave in the most appropriate manner for the highest versatility of circumstances in which you could find yourself. So versatility of appropriate behavior, if you will, across as many circumstances as possible. And that would include sometimes making the right choice. Some circumstances require you to sit and be quiet and just not do anything. And then some circumstances require you to act. And the best transformation you can have is to where, when you know exactly what to do and why and what your role is and what you should aim for and when you should lead the charge and when you should fall behind somebody else who's leading the charge, you got to make those decisions. You got to use discernment. And when you hear information, how do you separate the signal from the noise and strive for what is good? An example of this, and this is a great example because it is not a religious example, it is secular on purpose. Because if I were to use a religious example, there would be propositional truth or faith variance with a religious example of things that some of you in the audience don't claim to believe. Well, I don't believe that, you know, and you would take issue with it. So what I'm doing is a movie review of the movie. It's not a movie review. It's a character study of the character, of the main character in the movie World War Z. It sounds crazy because, you know, people think, well, that's a zombie movie. And I would make the argument, and this is what I said to the people in my circles recently, I don't think it's a zombie movie at all. I think this is a character study of somebody who acts more or less appropriately in the worst possible scenario you could put a person in. And now we're in a scenario that's similar to this. Not similar to this in a way, but if you were to take, I mean, the quarantine situation that we're in because of COVID-19, if you were to ratchet it up 1,000%, that would be a zombie apocalypse. And it wouldn't be a zombie apocalypse like The Walking Dead. I saw a meme recently where this girl is praying, Lord, if we have a zombie apocalypse, please make them like the zombies on The Walking Dead and not the ones on World War Z. Because in World War Z, they run at full speed, very tenaciously, and they bite you and you transform. By the time we're seeing the main character, it is up to within 12 seconds of being bitten, okay? So imagine how fast something like that would spread with somebody spreading it with as much tenacity as they could possibly garner for themselves. It's pretty frightening. Now, but the main thing is, I think that is just a backdrop. And what we have is an emergence of this character who is called upon to act in this scenario. And you can follow him and you can see how he acts more or less appropriately in unpredictable ways, in very good ways, and sometimes surprising ways that make you think. And I think that this is a good idea. If as a Christian, if I have an aim, I want to transform into something, this is an idea of the kind of circumstances that you would want to transform to be able to do. Now, if you could abstract those into, maybe it's not these particular scenarios, but something else, and then pull out a spiritual equivalent for that. So as we move forward, I want to say that this is not an endorsement of any movie or of Hollywood in general. World War Z is not just a zombie movie. It's a case study of how an aptly transformed person who possesses all four types of knowing, which I'll show you in a second, can behave appropriately amid an ultimate kairos situation. We'll talk about what that word means in a second too. The decision points, adaptive TTPs, attitude and agency of the main character are illustrative of Romans 12:2 transformation, of the Romans 12:2 transformation, and of the faith discussed in the latter segments of our video on the coronavirus that we had a couple weeks ago. So narratives, any kind of narrative, can serve as a type of mythopoetic data compression which can retain and convey information in a way that is memorable, inexhaustible, and timeless. Okay? What that means is if I gave you 1,000 facts that you need to know or doctrines you need to learn, whatever, you probably would not remember all 1,000 facts or things you need to know, moral points, right? But if I tell you a story, okay, that story is memorable. If it's a good story, it's inexhaustible, which means you can always pull more truth out of it. You can get all 1,000 truths out of that story. The morals of the story, if you will be, thousands of truths. And it's timeless, okay? It works across all segments of time. And that's one of the things about the Bible. One of the reasons it's lasted so long is because the narratives in there they fit this criteria. They're memorable, they're inexhaustible, and they're timeless, okay? You can keep getting information out of them that you can use. And a lot of times, even movies today, you can get stuff out of that you can use. And I don't want to take you to how you should watch movies. I used to be part of, you might call this a cult, and looking back I probably would too, but I used to be part of Christian fundamentalist groups that did not believe in owning a TV. I spent a little time there as a kid, and then when I grew up, kind of grew out of it as a teenager, our family kind of moved on to something else. And then when I became an adult, or a young adult, very young adult, I had this idea that was the way to go, and that kind of thinking treats television and movies or the stories like all they are is entertainment, okay? And you're just putting garbage in your mind, garbage in, garbage out. You call CBS, NBC, and ABC the three sewer lines that come into your house, and they call the TV the glass toilet and the television and Hollywood. I got all that stuff, okay? I used to preach sermons against having a TV in your house, okay? And I've changed recently, not just recently, but I've come to the point where stories can, if you watch a story with somebody who's close to you, they provide a lot of discussion points that give you an opportunity to discuss life and psychology and self-development. And just because the story is conveying a message, sometimes it conveys a message that it doesn't intend to, and that's very interesting. And just because the writer of the story is intending to convey a message, that's where your sense-making has to come in and say, well, if they're preaching a certain message, I have to see around that, okay? So I'm not, you keep using your sense-making, you keep using discernment, and you speak with the people in your life critically about what it is that you're watching, and you find out if there's any morals of the story that you can pull out, and you see if you can detect the agenda of the storyteller, that kind of thing. I was listening to Jordan Peterson, his Maps of Meaning, class number 9, and I've been through all Jordan Peterson's stuff, I think all his stuff, and I took his Maps of Meaning class, I took his personality class, his 2 psychology classes, I read his Maps of Meaning book, his newer book, and a lot of other information from him. In this Maps of Meaning class number 9, he's talking about literarily embedded and encoded wisdom. And he says, and these are, I was kind of typing notes as he's talking, so this might not be exact, but he says, we have information encoded in our behavior that transcends our understanding. And part of doing a play, like kids act out like their mom and dad, and like they're going to the grocery store, kids pretend, they pretend they're soldiers and cops and robbers and cowboys and Indians. They pretend all these things, they act these things out. And as adults, we continue to act these kinds of things out in things like theater because it gives us a chance to mentally go through the process of a character in a story without having the cost of having to be that character. Okay, we can see a character make bad choices and then reap the whirlwind, and us not actually have to reap that whirlwind ourselves. We get to war game mentally, if you will, vicariously through proxy through somebody else in a story rather than having to do it ourselves. And so it is kind of a way of rehearsal for your own life to think things through. And so it's part of human nature to do this. So he says, you go see a Shakespeare play, and then after the Shakespeare play, you go and discuss the play with your friends. You go have lunch or coffee or something like that. And that's your attempt to take the behavioral wisdom that's encoded into the story and make it articulate. So we're doing that all the time. When you watch a movie, you do that. And he makes this statement. That's actually how educated people interact with literature. And of course, he's speaking extemporaneously. So maybe educated is not the best way to say, or some people would see that as a condescending tone, to use that word. But I have noticed that over the years, as I've gotten older and more mature, that is also how I watch literature. I watch pay attention to literature in any form, whether it's, written or on screen or whatever. So I take the people in my life and we have these conversations about the things that we watch. And that's what's enriching about it. It's not just entertainment. It's the way you can build the relationships and enrich your own life by having a discussion with people in your life. And then you create kind of a waypoint of growth that stems from something that you shared together in this experience, if you will. So he says that's how educated people interact with literature. So I would say that if you're watching movies, it's not that you're being entertained by them if you're doing it right. It's that you're interacting with literature in a way to see if there is something meaningful and timeless that can be extracted from what you're looking at, and something that can help build the relationships around you by dissecting together what it is that you just watched. All right. He says if you're uneducated, roughly speaking, you go see a movie and you just go see it, you never think about it. You don't think about it as something that was produced. You don't think about it as a cultural entity, and you never do that higher order analysis. And that is how I would describe myself watching stuff in the past. I thought of it as only entertainment, never did the higher order analysis on it. I was not equipped to do the higher order analysis on it. And now that I'm a little bit older, have a little more life experience behind me, there is a little bit of equipping to do a higher order analysis on it. And so watching stuff is a lot different now than it was 20 years ago for me. And so I hope that also some of you get what I'm saying here, and you don't see the fact that I'm talking about a movie and just absolutely flip your lid that I'm talking about a movie, okay? So if that's you, you might not be ready for this yet, okay? And then he has some other comments, but I think we get the point here. And, well, he says, so then that doesn't mean that people who don't go to movies and don't talk about them aren't learning anything. They're learning in a very abstracted form of imitation. So then you don't go to a movie. You go to 100 movies, and you imitate something that's common across 100 movies. Well, what's that? Well, that's an archetype, something that is common across 100 narratives, if you will, not just movies, the hero archetype, okay? Christ is an archetype because he is the archetypal example of taking on responsibility and being willing to sacrifice everything to follow through with that responsibility. And that is the archetype, and every person is supposed to imitate that, and not be an imitation of it, but to follow that example as of, I'm going to also take on responsibility and be willing to bear the cost of that responsibility as well. That's what we should be doing. So the 4 types of knowing, propositional knowing, procedural, and perspective and participatory. And propositional knowing is about conviction of truth claims. Procedural knowing is like knowing how to catch a baseball. It's engagement, practical demonstration of empowerment, the ability to do something. All right. Perspectival knowing is having an optimal grip on a situation, knowing where all the moving pieces are and what from your perspective and where you fit in the tool. And then participatory knowing is attunement and connectedness, and that continuity of contact is what John Vervaeke says. That continuity of contact, that attunement and connectedness with the arena and agency relationship. Now, if you put these things together, the faith that's connected with this, we walk by faith, not by sight. We tend to think that, some people would tend to think, and I would tend to think in the past, that would mean that, I'm just walking by faith, I'm just trusting God, and I don't know where I'm going. And that's not what that means at all. Walking by faith and not by sight means that there is a vision of a better future out there that only it's, where there's no vision, the people perish. You have a vision of it, and you can picture it, and you pull all the resources and leadership together, and you take on the responsibility to make that vision happen. Imagine like a bridge engineer. There is no bridge there. He walks by faith, not by sight. He has to fully commit himself to the end state of that bridge existing before it's there while nobody can see it. So he has faith in something that nobody can see, but it's not blind faith in something that it has no bearing on reality, can't be measured, tested, that kind of thing. So it's something that transformation, that thing that you're aiming for is something that you can envision, okay? And that thing that you can envision, you're going to have to alter and modify that over time and change it because, what do you know? What do you know about life? So you're going to learn every day, and you're going to modify that. And you have to aim for something or you'll be destroyed. So we're in this situation where we don't have enough information to have the perfect thing to aim for because we're flawed. But if you don't aim for something, you won't get anywhere. So you have to start aiming at something and modify what it is that you're aiming at as you go, okay? Continue to improve both yourself and the concept of the thing that you think you're aiming at. All right, so it's a constant attunement, if you will, and a constant calibration has to keep going on. You have to involve your discernment and all that. So we want these 4 kinds of knowing, not just Western Christianity today. That is a loud cat. Hey, buddy. Western Christianity today is focused almost solely on propositional knowing. I know that, or I believe that XYZ is true, conviction, that kind of thing. And that, to the exclusion of these other things. Now, I'm not going to take the time right now to get into that issue, but as we go forward in this analysis of this character, I think you'll understand these four types of knowing. So the zombie trope in our culture, there's a bunch of zombie movies coming out. I think the first zombie movie came out in like 1926. And there's lots of different kinds of zombies, but basically you have a creature that is mindless. Oftentimes the person is either dead or undead, or they're being controlled by something else. Some of the cartoons and the older movies, they have people walking around like this, and somebody's controlling them with like a little radio controller, you know, or a voodoo spell or something like that. And there was one movie where a guy was walking around back from the 40s, and he's like, "I's a zombie, I's a zombie." It's kind of funny. So the idea, it is the zombie trope is, and there's some more information on this that I could share, some of it that I haven't read through yet, that I want to get into, but essentially it's a picture of the meaning crisis that's happening in our Western culture, to where people have no meaning in their life, and they're latching on to these ideologies, propositional ideologies, and those ideologies, they're ideologically possessed. So those ideologies are, you know, that's the mastermind, that's the man behind the curtain controlling the little radio signal, controlling all the zombies, making them all follow this singular purpose. And, you know, a lot of zombies, they just have that one singular drive of, you know, in the 80s movies, brains. Why do they want to eat brains? Zombies get your brains, okay? There's something about zombies that messes with your head. It makes you have no agency or cognitive capability. It's a complete narrowing of cognitive capability down to one thing that's decided by something or someone else, okay? And if somebody's ideologically possessed, like we've talked about before on this channel, how Calvinists are ideologically possessed, they are controlled by that one thing. They're essentially a zombie. They're ideologically and cognitively a zombie. They are more or less stronger and weaker versions of this one virus of Calvinism that, you know, it's one thing that can infect people, and that's what's in control. They don't have it, it has them. And that's the main ideology we talk about on this channel. But any ideology could be like that, all right? And that one in particular, though, there's reasons for that that we talk about in other videos. Talk about the difference between kairos and chronos. There's two Greek words that show up that get translated as time, and the first one is chronos, and it could be a season, a while, a space, oftentimes. And the chronos is typically something in your life that you would expect. It's the day-to-day stuff, it's week to week, or significant events that you knew were coming, like when it's time to go to college, when it's time to, you know, get a job, when it's time to set up retirement. Those things aren't ordinary, average, every day, but you know they're coming, you expect them. They're kind of linear events, if you will. If you were to map out your life and say, okay, this is kind of when I'm going to go to college, here's the kind of career I'm going to have, and then I'm going to retire, that kind of stuff like that. It's linear and expected those things to happen. And then the kairos, so the chronos shows up 53 times, kairos shows up 87 times. Kairos in the Bible is like in 2 Corinthians 6:2, where it says, now is the accepted time, now is the day of salvation. Kairos is it's a limited period of time that is an opportune or seasonable time, something that has come to fruition. It could be a disruption, a non-linearity. Okay, think in your life, when something happens in your life, like when a relationship ends or when somebody dies unexpectedly, that is a kairos event. Okay, I have some explanations of a kairos. Somebody said, and I've tried to listen to some other people talking about what a kairos is. And in the kairos, we are in a period of time where a system is sensitive to our actions. There's a big timing issue to this. An action that would be important 5 weeks ago or 5 weeks from now might make a big difference in the system, or an action right now might make a difference now that might not have made a difference 5 weeks ago or 5 weeks from now. I think Jordan Hall was the one that actually said this stuff. A period of time where non-typical actions can have a huge impact on the systemic course of the future. And if you think of the systemic course of things, the example that Jordan Hall gave was, imagine a steel ball rolling through. If you ever played that game Labyrinth, where you move the little wood panels around, try to get the steel ball through the maze. Well, imagine a steel ball moving in a deep groove in the wood to where you couldn't dig it out if you wanted to, and it's just moving along. I mean, you'd really have to do something significant to get that ball out of there. So it's kind of fixed and set, and that's kind of analogous to trying to change things in our culture. If you try to change things in your denomination or in the government, it's probably not going to happen. It is on a set course. A kairos, imagine that groove in which the steel ball is rolling gets shallower and shallower and shallower till pretty soon there isn't one at all. And you've gone from a situation to where the future is set, fixed, and determined, and everybody pretty much knows what's going to happen, to where suddenly anything can happen. That ball can go anywhere. And the decisions that you make at that point in time are much more impactful than decisions you make while that ball is stuck in that groove. And that ball, that's our culture, that's our lives. Everything is moving along in that groove. And some things you couldn't change if you wanted to during Chronos times period. But when the Kairos happens, it can either be a disaster, an absolute disaster. Sometimes a disaster causes it, or you can act in such a way to turn it into an opportunity where we can take systemic failures that we had during the Chronos and then implement the positive changes during the Kairos. So it's important to understand that it is atypical behavior, and you have to spend your time in the Chronos preparing for the Kairos. So when the Kairos happens, you have to act. Now, the Bible has some stuff to say about the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. When you're following the letter of the law, you have to do these things. People get rigid and militant about these things and legalistic about these things, and those are Chronos things. Typically, and like I said in one of my previous videos in the Awakening the Spirit series, in the conference room that we filmed, is that pre-transformational. So almost all the instructions in the New Testament are pre-transformational instructions, kind of like, how to behave in a waiting room before you get called to the back. It's pre-transformational instructions. It is not. So once you are transformed, you are now in a situation, especially when you're transformed and in a Kairos event, where everything, you have to make the decision of what is right on the moment, and there is no system, there is no ethical code or moral code that tells you, that could possibly tell you the right thing to do or the right time to do it during the Kairos event. That is especially when transformed sovereign people are absolutely needed the most. And you could say that this COVID-19 is a Kairos. People might argue with that, and there's a couple different things you could argue. Okay, is the disease causing the Kairos? That's debatable. Is our reaction to the disease causing the Kairos? That's debatable. If our reaction to the disease is causing the Kairos, is it because there's some nefarious plan? Or is it because of the ineptitude and incompetence of the leaders making the decisions? So there's a decision tree you could go with there in trying to nail this down. But the point is, we are in it. And you have to view this situation, if you're not a decision maker at that level where you can make a huge difference, you just have to realize that whether it's the disease or the government, whether it's corruption or ineptitude, regardless of what that is, this is the environment in which you have to operate, and you have to figure out what you're going to do in this environment. So that brings us into this movie. Let's look at what this character does. If you've never seen this movie, I'm going to spoil everything, okay? If you haven't seen it, I recommend that you do see it, and maybe you might enjoy it a little more, get something more out of it. I mean by enjoy it, after watching this video. So when the movie starts off, This guy is the main character, played by Brad Pitt. He values his family. He's with his family. He possesses homemaking skills. He's cooking breakfast. He's viewed as a source of answers. The daughter asks him about what martial law is, and he has an answer for that. And so he's looked to as a person who knows things by the family. Okay, he's not an incompetent person. You know, a lot of movies paint the dad as somebody who doesn't know what's going on. This movie doesn't do that. One of the things I like about it. He quit his previous job to be with his family more often, so it shows you where his values are. He values his family. He can deal with kids at their level. He can deal with kids about their problems, even though he is trained and equipped to deal with much more serious, large-scale problems. Not that kids' problems aren't serious; they are. He lives very modestly. He's in a regular home. They show him driving a Volvo station wagon, that kind of thing. The wife was apparently not selected for shallow reasons. She appears very ordinary. But she is very functional and decisive without becoming hysterical or panicking when crazy situations start to arise. So it seems one of the words I just taught my kids yesterday, was the word equanimity. Okay, we looked at that and we talked about a bunch of different situations. So one thing we do when I watch a video or a movie with my kids, I try to have them tell me which characters have equanimity and how that played into the plot, on whether the plot went well for that character or not. And when it starts going well for them, is there an equivalent increase in equanimity with that character? Something to think about. So there's some equanimity going on here. And then there's a problem discovery. And you see that this character is curious. He doesn't bury his head in the sand. He doesn't just run. He doesn't panic. He's curious, and you see him looking around trying to see what's going on. He's surprised by a speeding garbage truck that took out a police officer. And as shocking as that is, he immediately has the wherewithal, and this is one of the first huge decisions that he has to make. This garbage truck, there's a cop talking to him in his window, and this garbage truck plows right by and takes out the police officer, probably kills the police officer, and this truck is plowing this huge thing, and there were just explosions a few minutes ago. So he jumps in the car, guns it, and follows the path the garbage truck is making, because that is opportune decisiveness, where you jump in and make a decision. That's amazing decisiveness. If you imagine yourself in a real world situation, who would have the wherewithal to see that happen and immediately jump in the car and follow this garbage truck because it's got the only path out of this traffic jam gridlock situation? Okay, so he does that. He seizes the opportunity to escape by closely following a path carved by the garbage truck. And he perceives the relevance of the situation that has likely never happened before and will never likely happen again. He says, this is relevant. I can't get out of here. I probably need to get out of here. There's a clear path. I better take it. So he sees that is relevant to him and his family. There's a child that immediately starts screaming, asking for a blanket. He doesn't get frustrated with the child. Equanimity there. They endure a car accident. Immediately, he starts issuing orders. He makes sure everybody's okay. He says, everybody out of the car. He has a plan. We got to keep moving. He has the presence of mind to observe the disease affect process and timing. So what's happening in this movie is this disease is spreading so fast. Everyone's tenaciously being bitten by these, transformed people who are transformed into these zombies. And the process takes about 12 seconds. He counts it. One of the child's toys goes off, and it counts 1, 2, while he's getting away into this. They've picked out, he says, go to the RV. So they're going to this RV, and they're just going to take an RV. That's another issue. And while they're going to the RV, he looks back, and this child's toy is counting up to 12, and it hits 12 and says trains in the station. That's exactly how long it took for this one character to change into this creature. So he's observing while he's acting in an emergency situation. He has the presence of mind to do that, okay? Now, understand that this is a highly dramatized situation, and that in a real-world scenario, you probably have a little more time than just a few seconds to be able to observe and act at the same time. Let's hope so. So he extemporaneously acquires a working vehicle that is not his. Now, we all know the rules. We don't steal vehicles, right? But he steals a vehicle, and nobody in the audience who's watching the movie is like, oh, he's a car thief. Nobody thinks that, because everybody understands that in this situation, It's just survival. And the people who own that RV are probably already dead anyway. So it's time to act. It's time to do what you can to save who you can. So he does that. He extemporaneously acquires a working vehicle that's not his. And it's one of many examples of him doing something that's wrong, that is right for, that's wrong in the chronos, that is right for the kairos. And as a Christian, there are times when you do something that's considered wrong in the chronos that is right for a particular kairos, not just a society-wide kairos like we're in now, but there might be one in your church, for example. And when that kairos happens, you have to take unprecedented actions for which there is no rule book. And then people are going to be split on whether or not you did the right thing. But you got to choose. You got to make a decision. And inaction is inaction. It is a decision. While this is going on, the wife effectively fights off aggressors without panicking. She has the wherewithal to brace herself against the other side of the vehicle and kick some of these infected people out of the window with her feet. You know, she can still act. She still has agency, and she's not panicking to where she can't be of any value. So also, the people don't become so preoccupied with the novelty that they can't make effective decisions. I mean, imagine you're in a city where you're surrounded by this happening. The novelty being something so new that you've never seen before that you just collapse and don't know what to do. They're not doing that. They're making effective decisions in the midst of this absolute chaos. So the main character deals with a child with asthma in a tender, focused, and appropriate way. And that, so it's interesting how they show the main character talking to people. He talks to strangers that are adults. He talks to, military commanders. He talks to combat trained men with whom he has to ask to sacrifice themselves. And he addresses each situation forthrightly and directly. And I think it's interesting that they show you a spectrum of different people that he can deal directly with. He can deal with anybody from children to zombies, to military commanders, to highly trained military commandos in a very forthright, frank, and effective way, assertively as well. And I think that's a pretty good characteristic of somebody who is transformed, to be able to deal with a wide variety of people. As they're getting ready to go to the apartment complex, they're in a grocery store and all kinds of stuff happens, and the main character, Jerry, has to shoot somebody, and a police officer comes up, and Jerry puts his hands up, but the police officer runs right by this open shooting. But what that shows is that all normal functions have been suspended. And you have to realize that when you're in a kairos situation in your life, in your church, state, society, whatever it is, at whatever level that it occurs, that when you're in a kairos situation, there is a time when all normal functions are suspended, and you have to act in the suspension of normal functions. And sometimes you have to act in the suspension of normal rules as well, where you have to break away from the letter of the law and look at the intent and figure out how to accomplish the intent, the spiritual intent, or the aim or the goal, regardless of what the letter of the law does or doesn't say, because there is a point where it is not applicable. There is a point where it is not applicable. Yeah, I said that twice on purpose, okay? And you have to get that. So a lot of unexplained things occur, like the infected are passing some people right by them, and they're running around biting everybody, but there's some people that run right by and don't bite. That's unexplained. And so you can either kind of flip out about the unexplained things, but you'll see that Jerry, the main character, tucks these away in his head, and he recalls them later, and it's significant, and you'll see why. So he goes to this apartment complex, and he accepts help from others. He leaves when he's asked, and encourages movement for safety. So he kind of has an idea of when things get like this, you have to move. Those who move stay alive. So that's what he's encouraging to happen, and they don't, and they die. Well, one gets out, but basically the parents don't, and they die. He creates an improvised bayonet. He improvises protective gear by duct taping magazines and phone books to his forearms and legs. Now, in just a few hours, he's already ascertained what's going on, and he's been able to think about what he can do to mitigate getting infected himself when he has to come face to face with these things. So he's got this improvised bayonet on the end of his gun using duct tape, and he's duct taped some some magazines and phone books to his arms and legs in case he gets bitten, which is very smart, to be able to think to do that. So to ascertain in a different kind of Kairos situation, what is it that poses a threat to me, and what can I do immediately to protect myself from that threat? That might be what you have to do. In a church situation, you might have to do something to protect yourself from the threat of some elders or deacons or a faction of the congregation or something like that. You have to think those things through. And so in the military, we have something called TTPs, and that's tactics, techniques, and procedures. Okay. And when I was trained to be an officer, my training was Vietnam era jungle warfare type training. But I had not been to NTC at that point in the initial training. And there I was in 2003 in Iraq, and I'm in the desert, and I've never had anything but jungle era training. And a lot of people were in the same shoes. They had not had training for that kind of theater. And so in that point, Army doctrine was not as important. What was important was the TTPs, the techniques, tactics, and procedures that you got from the other units who were around you. We're all learning from each other, and we're basically building on the spot doctrine as we go, based on the environment and based on what we're trying to accomplish in that environment. So the old legacy Army doctrine did not apply, that we had all been trained on, did not apply in this new scenario, and we had to make our own doctrine on the fly, okay? And that's what we did. And in a Kairos situation, that's what you have to do. When the family dies, this little boy escapes, and he takes the little boy in, so it shows that he's got some compassion, even though he acts decisively. When you act decisively, people think that you're arrogant or a sociopath or a psychopath when you can act decisively and make quick decisions. But they show him, so you don't think he's that, because people tend to think that. They show him willingly taking in this little boy to show you that he has a human and compassionate side. When he comes out the top, he has gotten some blood in his mouth from the infected, so he thinks he might turn. He doesn't know what it is that makes you turn. Do you have to get bitten, or is just blood getting in your mouth enough to make you turn? So as soon as he gets out of the building where he just had to fight off a bunch of these creatures, he runs over to the ledge, and he throws his gun down, runs over to the ledge, and he's getting ready to jump off, and he's counting to 12. So if he can make it to 12 and doesn't turn, then he's good. If he doesn't make it to 12, he's going to jump off and kill himself. Now, in that scenario, nobody questions that. That sounds really smart, for the sake of his family and the other people there, to save them from himself becoming one of those creatures. But don't we all have Chronos rules against suicide? I mean, a lot of Christians out there teach you commit suicide, you automatically go to hell. Okay, what about that scenario? And there's another scenario in this movie too, where, I'm not an advocate of euthanasia, but in that scenario, you got 12 seconds or you're going to become a killer yourself. It's time to overturn a rule, okay? So the situationally dependent right choices cannot be logged in any code or ethics or morals. A person must transform so that they can discern the most efficient thing to do with respect to a certain goal, such as survival or avoidance of great danger or indifference to others. He and his family are picked up by a helicopter that's sent by the Deputy Secretary of the UN, because he used to work with him and he knows him and he wants him to come back and work for him. So he gets a helicopter and goes to this Navy boat, this Navy ship. And on this ship, he's introduced to a doctor who represents the best hope for solving the problem. This guy's got all the answers. He's an expert virologist, and he's going to solve this problem or lead the team to solve the problem, that kind of thing. So he encounters the Navy. He has an encounter with the Navy commander, and what Jerry wants to do is he just wants to stay with his family and be safe. And he doesn't want to go back to work for the government or the UN or anybody like that. But they're saying, we need you. We need your skill sets. And he's like, I'm out. I've done this before. I just want to be safe and I want to stick with my family. And the Navy commander convinces him. He's like, look, you're on this boat. There's a long line of people waiting to get on this boat. And if you're not going to be of any help to us, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, you know. And so he can either help or not. So he's willing to adjust his perspective based on additional input, and significantly alters his intended role in the situation. So he goes from not being willing to help at all to being the main hope that they send out to go find the answer of what to do about this. So he willingly allows an interaction with somebody else to change his perspective, and then he adopts a new agency in the arena. Okay, I was doing this. I was just protecting my family, but now I've become convinced that the best way to protect my family is to use my skill set actually to protect everybody. If I can solve this problem, then the problem will not be a problem, and then my family will be safe for that reason. So now his agency just went from something very small to something a much grander scale of impact for what it is that he has to do. Okay. So he realizes his best chance of saving that which is most important to him is also that which will help what's important to everyone. And those two goals are in alignment. So he goes with that goal. And then he gets on the plane, and I have a picture of him here talking to the doctor on the plane. So when they get to South Korea, so they're heading to South Korea because they get this email about somebody used the word zombie, so they think everything started there. So they're going to send him there to investigate how this stuff started, so maybe that will help them get the answer to how they can solve it. So him and the virologist and some Navy SEALs are going to South Korea to find out this issue. So on the plane, the virologist passes along some very insightful information that Jerry remembers. But upon landing, the doctor, the virologist, is a very young guy. He has to be told to keep his finger off the trigger of the gun, of the pistol, because he has his finger on the trigger of the pistol, and they're going to be surrounded by zombies, and there's other people with them. So Jerry is having to tell him, look, do what these guys tell you, follow these guys. If you get confused, look at their feet, listen to their voices. He tells them things like that. Keep your finger off the trigger. Well, something happens. They have to run back in the plane. And the doctor, who has all this information, who's the best hope for mankind, he slips and his finger's on the trigger and he shoots himself in the head. And now he's dead. And that is an example. Predictably, this doctor dies tragically by his own hand when he slips on the plane's boarding ramp when he's running back into the plane because they got to go back in to secure the area. Now, that doctor who shoots himself in the head by accident because he slipped and had his finger on the trigger, he represents somebody with vast propositional knowing. Remember the 4 kinds of knowing. He has propositional knowledge that is theoretically sound, okay? Valuable knowledge. However, he has 0 agency arena attunement, participatory knowing, and very quickly loses 100% of his capacity to put his propositional knowledge to use, because now he's dead and he can't so since he has no agency arena attunement, he can't use his propositional knowledge. So the solution is now left to those who have better participatory attunement to the Kairos environment. And I think there is kind of a message there that when you know say you have all this stuff figured out in Bible doctrine, you got all this systematic theology all figured out, you're like this doctor. You cannot operate in a Kairos environment. Your knowledge is not going to be any good to anybody because it won't be long before you are outmoded. You become legacy very fast, okay? And so it winds up people who have better participatory knowing are more suited to get answers ultimately than the people who have the better propositional knowledge. And so the moral of the story there, which I think is an accurate one, is that propositional knowledge by itself is less valuable than the combination of the other 3 types of knowing, but ideally you want all 4 types. So I liken this to a professional Christian who's been trained in detailed theoretical propositional knowing, but who has no grasp whatsoever on any situation. He certainly cannot get a grip, much less an optimal grip, of any kairos situation. So all your, your professors, your seminary presidents, your pastors, and especially the denominational leaders, those guys, propositional stuff. When it comes to the kairos, they are experts at building a monument in a chronos mindset. They are absolutely no use whatsoever. They're all melms. They're all brother melms. They're absolutely no use whatsoever in a kairos mindset. And like on the other side of this corona thing, when everybody's thinking about, oh, I saw somebody post on Facebook, the government's telling us that, we can't gather together and worship. And I can't help but think that if you thought that what was going on at your church was worship to begin with, you got a problem. You're part of the problem that needs to be solved. And this is an excellent opportunity to come out of this situation. And I hope people realize what attending a physical church service was not doing for their spirituality, because the concepts that we have in our mind of how to do Christianity are not good. They're not biblical. They're not right. They're not helpful. And they're not transformative. And they're not preparing anybody for any kind of kairos. So they encounter with these soldiers, and these soldiers say, they make fun of the doctor. Well, he shouldn't have come here. And Jerry reminds them, he didn't have to come here, Well, that's another moral of the story. Just because somebody acts from an altruistic motive, and granted, the doctor, he didn't have to come there, but he did, so he is willing to put himself in danger. So that's good, and we should honor people like that, okay, and respect them, and I'm all for that. But just because they have an altruistic motive does not mean that they have any significant contribution to the problem-solving process, because the doctor lost any capacity he had. Even though you should respect him, you should honor him because of what his willing. He was willing. He got on the plane. He went out there. He was scared to death, but he was trying anyway. You should respect him for that. But he did not contribute to the problem-solving process at all, except for maybe some of the information that he gave to Jerry on the plane on the way over. But his contribution ended there, all right? So in like fashion, sometimes we mistake honoring somebody and respecting somebody with the idea that we should outsource our sense making to them and not have our own agency in the kairos. You say, what do you mean? Well, in Christian history, if somebody was a martyr, we respect them for that. And there's a temptation to think that you have to respect them by believing what they believed. And that's the wrong answer. Just because they were a martyr or just because they did something else great, honor them, respect them, do your own sense making. Listen to what they have to say, separate the truth from the noise, but just because somebody was burned at the stake, God rest their soul, does not mean that they had a lot of signal and very little noise. It doesn't mean that they have anything to contribute to the problem-solving process. They might have something, but just because they died for what they believed does not necessarily mean anything they have to help you. They have anything to help you. Now, I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just saying it doesn't necessarily mean that. Okay, so don't miss my meaning on that. And the same thing happens not necessarily because somebody was a martyr, but if they dedicated their whole life to Christianity. Oh, Brother Melms was such a great Christian. And then we think it's dishonorable to him to not believe everything he believed. Don't fall for that. That is bad sense making. Honor Brother Melms and leave all his garbage, noise behind. If he had any signal, take that with you, and don't worship him. Don't be a respecter of persons. Okay? Separate the signal from the noise. Use your discernment and take what you can for the kairos and situation which you are in, which nobody else could adequately prepare you for. So willingness, as Jerry is there, there's this CIA guy who is in a prison cell, and everyone and all the soldiers there tell him, don't waste any time with that guy. He was selling guns to North Korea, and that happened. But he goes and talks to him anyway, and when he talks to him, he gets some key insight that he finds out he needs to go to Jerusalem next, and that happens to us sometimes. You'll be interested in something, and all the people around you, don't waste your time with that. We are addicted. I just heard somebody say this recently too. We are addicted to certainty and consensus. And what we want is certainty and consensus. And somebody who's transformed has to know how to act in the kairos with uncertain information. You have to take it all in, conduct your own sense making. Okay. Just being hopeful or nostalgically hopeful that something is true and deciding, willfully asserting that you have faith in something is not the same as certainty. And you need to know the difference between those two things. So he's willing to consult a source that everybody else there says not to waste his time with. And when he does that, he realizes he needs to go to Jerusalem, because he finds out from this guy that Jerusalem knew this thing was coming in enough time to build walls before it came. He's like, whoa, what did they know? When did they know it? And how did they come to know it? So he needs to go to Jerusalem to find this out. Okay. So that's a big issue. So they're going to get back on the plane. But something else that's interesting is that this CIA officer also tells him that North Korea is the only country that had zero outbreak, because as soon as they found out about it, they removed the teeth of all 24 million people in 24 hours. Therefore, it did not spread. That's interesting. It also happens to be a parallel. Now, this is probably just communist propaganda, but it also just so happens that right now during COVID-19, North Korea is one of the few countries not reporting any outbreaks. Now, of course, it's North Korea. So what does that mean? Probably nothing. But it's interesting. It's interesting that I see that as kind of a prediction. So he gets, after talking to this guy, he's decisive and assertive. He goes up to the pilot who landed the plane. He says, we're going to Jerusalem. I'm your co-pilot. The only people left at this point who came on the plane are him, the pilot, and one Navy SEAL. Okay. So he's willing to extemporaneously operate outside his own comfort zone, because he says, I'm your co-pilot. He has not been flying planes in a long time. Imagine most people in this situation say, hey, I know you haven't flown in a while, but we need you to fly this plane. Oh, I don't know. I don't think I should. It's been so long, and I've never been in a plane just like this. None of that. None of that. He realizes the importance of the situation. He's like, well, I've got some flying experience. It's been a while. I've never been in one of these planes, but hey, I'm your co-pilot. Let's go. So bam, he goes and does it. So that's assertiveness and decisiveness outside of a comfort zone, willingness to overcome it. Now, something else that happens, as they're going out to the plane, they decide to take bicycles out to the plane because bicycles are quieter. Now, in a chronos situation, you would never in a million years say, hey, let's take our bicycles out to the plane to load the plane. Nobody would say that. But in this situation, they need to be quiet, and bicycle tires are quieter than feet. So they're going to take bicycles out there. So that's an example of using an extemporaneous TTP for a situation in which you have new constraints now. Now you have to get out to the plane, and you have to be as quiet as possible when you do it. You can't even have footstep sounds, because these things will hear you and wake up and come attack you. So they're trying to prevent that. As they're going out there, his phone rings, and it's his wife. And since his phone rings, a lot of these things start waking up, and a lot of people start dying. And it's horrible. So essentially, you could say that his wife, by calling at the wrong time, or him by not turning off the cell phone, killed a lot of people. You could say that. So that's an example of bad operating during the Kairos, where something that you normally do is a very normal function. So they're doing so many abnormal things, you forget the normal things, if you will. You always turn off your phone before church or in a movie theater or something like that, and then all of a sudden, now you're at this situation where it matters the most, and that's the one thing you forget to do. So that's a bad deal. The Army commander out there is a guy named Captain Speake, Speke, and he is driving this truck, telling these guys to pedal their bikes, and he's helping fight off the zombies. And he goes out there and the plane has to be fueled up too. That's one of the problems too. How do you fuel up a plane during a zombie attack? So he's fueling up the plane, and while he's fueling up the plane, he gets bitten in the leg. He gets attacked and bitten in the leg. So he's going to transform. And so in less than 12 seconds, he walks off and he puts the gun to his own head and he takes himself out. And again, I think everybody's got rules against suicide. Suicide is bad. You should prevent it no matter what. But in that situation, nobody questions it. Even everybody watching the movie, we're sad to see a good soldier go, but we know why he does it, and nobody questions that decision once it's time to make that decision. So does somebody go to hell for that, you know? But that demonstrates that the rules for right and wrong are not perfectly rigid, but are best understood in light of the present circumstances and objectives. Appropriateness of your behavior is situationally dependent. An appropriate action is not something that can be mimetically transmitted. Nobody could teach him a year before that there was going to, you know, here's when you do and here's when you don't commit suicide. You can't teach that, okay? He just knows. He intrinsically knows. He can assess the situation, make that decision for himself, and he breaks the rules, which happens to be the right rule for that situation. And then because he was fueling the plane, now these three guys are on the plane, the Navy SEAL, the pilot, and Jerry, and the fuel line is still in the plane. So Jerry has to look the Navy SEAL dead in the face and say, the fuel line's still in the plane. We can't take off with it in there. And the Navy SEAL doesn't question anything. He just says, I sure hope you find what you're looking for. I sure hope Jerusalem pans out or something like that. I forget what he says. And then he goes out there and he does his duty. He unhooks the fuel line knowing that he's going to die for going back out there. That's just how it is. So that's pretty amazing to be able to do that, to look somebody in the face and say, and ask them to die a horrible death within minutes, within seconds, really. So he has to go out there and do that. So South Korea, you see a bunch of examples there. So they get in the plane and they fly. So what I want you to be thinking about all this time is all the little decisions they're making that aren't the norm, that aren't the Chronos norm. And also when he goes against the majority recommendation to not talk to the CIA guy and he talks to him and it winds up panning out. So he goes to Jerusalem, and I have a picture up here that shows the walls out there. And Jerusalem had enough, in Israel, they had enough time, enough warning to build these walls. And it shows him coming in, and he gets assigned this Israeli soldier who's a female who plays a significant character, and for the rest of the movie from here out, she's a significant character. And he's talking to this Israeli intelligence guy, what do they call him, Mossad, something like that. And he's asking how this happened. He says they received a telegraph from India which had the word zombie, or technically the word undead, in it. And so everyone thought it was either a hoax or not worth paying attention to or overblown. And so this is very interesting here. This is very interesting for sense making and for anti-consensus. They said they developed something called the rule of the 10th man. And that is when you have 10 people in the council and all 10 people agree unanimously on a certain interpretation of what information means or what to do about it, it is the duty of the 10th person to disagree, no matter what it is. And that is why he disagreed and said, okay, everyone thinks I'm going to say that it is zombies. And so we're going to build a wall around this city. We're not going to let anybody in or out except in a very controlled way. So I love that. The idea of the 10th man. I think we need a 10th man on global warming. We need a 10th man on so many other things that popped in my head earlier that I can't think of on the spur of the moment now. But there are so many cases where consensus is the name of the game, and we're addicted to certainty and consensus. But I think in some of these things, we need a 10th man on these things. When it comes to, if you're ideologically possessed by Calvinism, you need to be the 10th man and disagree. Okay, the necessity to conduct your own sense making and be that 10th man. I think it'd be kind of cool to start like a fellowship group called the 10th man. So, our job is just to make sure we're pursuing lines of thought that are disagreement with what is most commonly believed to be true. Something like that. I don't know. So they're going through they're in Jerusalem. They're going through all these extreme measures to overcome but they do not overcome overlooked details. And what do you mean by that? They went through all these measures to build these walls, right? But something happens. They have all these people gathered together where they're coming in through the gates safely. And you see these people over there praying, and they're singing this little song. Well, 5 or 6 people singing a little song isn't that big of a deal. But this one girl picks up a microphone and starts leading the singing. Da, 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 da. So they're singing. And now with that microphone going, more people can hear the song, more people of that religion, whatever they're doing, or they all start joining in. So now there's this big ruckus. All the zombies start coming against the wall. So they thought to build the walls, but they did not think about having a noise ordinance. And that kind of shows you how you can get really big things right, and then you miss small things, and it still ruins the day. So there should have been a noise ordinance. I think there's a possible hidden message there that collectively, maybe from the writers, that collectively organized religion is directly responsible for infecting other people with mindlessness. So it's when you start leading religion in a big way, somebody started leading the singing with a microphone, that's when they became zombies. I don't know if they're trying to give you that message or not, but it's an interesting message. If that is the message that they're there. So then these things climb up the side of the wall, and they start eventually coming over the edge of the wall, and they're running around and biting people and affecting them. Then you have, now the walls are keeping them in. Now they're being infected just like every other place was. And now the main character is running around with his Israeli soldier. Her name is Sigan, S-E-G-E-N, Sigan. And as Sigan is fighting some of these zombies off, one of the zombies bites Sigan's arm. I think it's her left arm. And you see this image here where Jerry is looking at Sigan's arm. Where is that picture? I think I had it backed up one. And without thinking, he immediately grabs a knife from one of the soldiers and cuts off her arm from about the forearm up. And then it takes a second for the soldier to realize what just happened to her. And so he makes a split decision, cuts her arm off. And then he starts wrapping, putting a tourniquet on so she doesn't bleed to death. And she's panicking because she thinks she's going to turn. And he's telling her, you're not going to turn, you're not going to turn. So not turning is good news, even though you just lost your hand. I've used that exact example before in some of our sessions, some of the live sessions and some of these sessions, where I say that sometimes, we have a rule where we don't bite, kick, or hurt, scratch people, but there comes a time sometime when you have to cut off somebody's arm or leg for their own good. And this movie has an exact depiction of that. Now, think about me. A lot of you out there, you may not know me personally, but I think you kind of know me a little bit. If I were to come up to you and we're in conversation and I said, man, today I had to cut off somebody's arm, I think most of you would immediately think there must have been some kind of drastic situation that made that necessary. You would not, if I said that, you would not think probably that I was wrong for cutting off their arm. Well, you shouldn't cut off people's arms, Kevin. That's wrong. Who would think that if I told you I had to cut off somebody's arm? Because in a Kairos situation, that you have to act in an atypical way in order to preserve things that are more important than the rules. And saving somebody's life is more important than following the rule of not cutting someone's arm off. Does that make sense? And so now let's take it to something religious that you all feel very strongly about. Say, I had to quit the church. I had to get the pastor fired. I had to split the deacon body. I had to get divorced. Now you start saying things like that, everyone starts to judge you. You're being divisive. Or you start talking about divorce, especially. So many people just assume this is because obviously you failed at some point or you wouldn't have gotten divorced. Do you think that this main character here the reason that arm had to be cut off was because he failed at some point? No. It's because there was no other option. And when Christians have something to say, like this horrible thing, I had to resort to these drastic measures, we should think about that. We have no idea about the kairos that was in their life. And we should think about that before we open our mouths in judgment about what they should have done. You know, I put my story online, told people kind of what happened to me. I get all these, 90% of people are very supportive and they understand what's going on. But about 10% of the people, they want to tell me what I should have done or how I did wrong, like I don't know. And it's so demeaning and insulting and priggish of those people to act that way. Don't be that person. When a Christian tells you they had to resort to drastic measures, have the humility to realize that you have no idea what kind of kairos they were going through when they had to cut that arm off. You understand that? So you don't understand people's kairoses. So we need to get that. As they're leaving, also, his pilot buddy, who was supposed to be waiting for him, is now taking off without him. So he now has no way to leave. So something about when he cuts this girl's arm off, he has to help her get mobility. And then so he immediately had to choose the lesser of two bad options. He had to evaluate, prioritize, and act. And later he explains that he didn't know it would work. She's like, how did you know that would work? I didn't, but he had to act. You have to do something, and there's no time, and some choice has to be made. Either she's definitely going to turn, or I could try this, and maybe she won't. Okay? So he has a willingness to improvise and try something new when there is a lack of other options. And that's something a lot of Christians don't have, is the willingness to improvise and try something new when there are no other options presenting themselves. Make an option. So now it's time to leave, and he's getting abandoned. He's supposed to get on one helicopter, and that helicopter gets overcome, and he can't get on that when it crashes and blows up. And then he's trying to go over to where his buddy is in the plane, and that plane is taking off without him. And so you could, in that situation, everything is being completely overrun. It would be very easy to just panic and do the wrong thing and die, right? But he improvises in the face of imminent danger. He stays calm and collected, and they go out and they basically commandeer a commercial plane before it takes off. They go out there and they hold up their guns, and then he gets the pilots on the phone later on. So he goes up and he does this field bandage on Sigan to help bandage up where her arm got cut off. And they're talking, and she says something. Now, she doesn't know anything that he knows, but she says something, makes this little comment about being dead weight. And he gets an insight from it. And also, I want to point out that it's interesting that while they're on the plane, he takes the time to implement routine medical care. What's routine medical care? Like, okay, we're being attacked by zombies everywhere. The world is falling apart, but I need to change this bandage on this arm. So there's pointing out the fact that you need to keep doing the daily routine things that keep life going, even when everything else is chaos. You need to pay attention to those things. He uses alcoholic drinks as an antiseptic and for pain relief. He drinks a little, she drinks a little, pours it on the arm as an antiseptic, and it's very painful. Of course, the teetotalers who you couldn't drink anything would get upset, even though that if you're going to break the rule about not drinking alcohol, that's the time to break the rule about not drinking alcohol. Okay, when you're trying to do field expedient emergency medical care when there's nothing else, no other kind of medicine around. Okay. So teetotalers would be wise to make an exception in this case. And then he's having a conversation with her, and he has a moment of insight from something that she says. And this, to me, what I think churches should be doing, instead of mimetically transmitting propositions that people should know, basically the church is turning everyone into the doctor that shoots himself in the head. They got all this information, but they're not, you don't have any attunement with their agency in the arena. And they shoot themselves in the head because they don't know how to behave in the arena. So what the church is doing is giving everybody propositional systematic theology knowledge, okay? And nobody can operate in the arena, and we're all completely useless. What I think should be happening, what I think I see in Ephesians 4, is where the mutual edification of every member of the body to everybody else. In other words, we're not just mimetically transmitting doctrines everybody should memorize and learn and rules everybody should follow, but we're trying to cultivate insight. And through this interaction with this soldier, she makes a little throwaway comment about being dead weight because her arms are off, and that causes him, that is the trigger, that's an insight. An insight is a rapid increase in cognitive fluency. And that is an insight that ties together all this stuff he's been observing. Some things that the doctor said, some things, the people that were not getting bitten being passed over. He gets this theory in his head based on something that she said. She had no idea she was providing the insight, and he had no idea he was about to get it. And real, live, living, face-to-face mutual edification happens in that fashion. And that's what should be happening at church. You shouldn't just show up and everybody hear one guy talk. There should be a mutual sharing of information where other people get to chime in and pitch in different perspectives, and then insight gets a chance to occur, even from people from whom you would least expect it. So this allows him to connect the dots with the observed phenomena that he has so far. And notice that the insight came from a non-expert, okay? And we think, oh, all the insights we're going to get come from these people, these gurus, people that have been studying, have PhDs for years and years and years, and doctorates in theology and all this. No, they're not going to come from those people. They might be realized, the relevance might be realized by some of those people, but the insights probably aren't going to come from them. So we should have insight cultivation as a means of educating and edifying the body of Christ. So he combines all this information, then he realizes, hey, we need to head for a World Health Organization research facility, all right? So he talks to his buddy at the UN, and then he gets them to talk to the pilot. The pilot agrees. And so he needed to appeal to a mutually recognized authority in order to establish the new destination or objective. He doesn't have his own pilot anymore to tell him where to go, so he has to get these pilots to agree with him. So the pilots and him recognize the UN as the authority, or as a trusted source, whatever. I don't want any comments about how you feel about the UN, because I feel the same way, but it's story. So that's the purpose that it serves. So they appeal to a mutually recognized authority in order to establish the new destination directive, get everybody on the same sheet of music. Now, then there is a surprise. They think they're safe on the plane. They got away, but then one of the flight attendants in the back finds another zombie in the restroom in the rear of the plane, and then another outbreak occurs on the plane. And so there has to be decisiveness there, where this outbreak starts making its way to the front of the plane. And we've seen outbreaks, and you're in a very limited space. There's nowhere to run to. There's nowhere to hide. There's no helicopter that's going to come get you off the top of the building. Something has to be done. So they fight off on the ones they can. Sigyn pulls out her sidearm and starts shooting some of them in the head. And then he makes a decision. He's like, okay, all these zombies are going to come get us eventually because there's too many of them to fight off. Or I could take one of Sigyn's grenades here and throw it and blow a hole in the plane, which is what he does. He takes one of her grenades, throws it, blows a hole in the plane, and it starts sucking out everybody who's not grabbed onto anything, whether they're turned or not. And so he's latched onto. They put their seatbelts on after the grenade goes off, and then of course the plane crash lands. And they survive. So would you ever, is it ever a good idea to throw a grenade on a plane? Is it a good idea to have a plane wreck? So you could either die from zombies for sure, or you could cause a plane wreck that you might survive in. It's two very bad options. And a lot of people who go through a kairos in their own life, like having to end a relationship, like a divorce or something like that. They're in this situation where, not because of any desire or anything they've done, they're in this situation where all they have are bad options. And that's the situation they're in. That's the situation he's in. And sometimes you got to throw the grenade in the plane. you got to think, well, I can either die for sure or risk a high chance of dying in a plane crash that will result from what I'm about to do. So he decides to die in a plane crash, or possibly die in a plane crash. So he quickly decided between the lesser of two bad options. He evaluated, prioritized, and acted. And that's what you have to do. He had relevance realizations, connecting the situation with the goal, with the grenade, and the possible outcomes. So he's got these zombies coming there in a plane. He sees this grenade, and he does all the math. You know, one of those memes where you see all the little math working out in front of their head. He does all the calculations and acts. He acts. The plane crashes, but there are survivors. He and Segan survive, and he has this big gash in his side where some kind of shrapnel went through him. Now, Segan is helping him with mobility. And if it wasn't for her, if he hadn't saved her, she saves his life. And if he hadn't saved her life by cutting her arm off, she would not be around to save his life. That's kind of important. That's very thought-provoking. So his decision to save her life back in Jerusalem ultimately wound up saving his life. He does have a moment of self-centered loss of cool where he loses his equanimity and gets mad. What do you know about having a family? That kind of thing. But he is quickly reoriented and sobered toward the bigger perspective and primary objective. He finds out that his insight was that the zombies are not attacking people who have terminal illnesses. So if there's people who are already dying from cancer or something else, they're not biting those people. So his thinking is, how do we make these zombies think that people have this problem so that they won't bite them? So they have to go obtain pathogens to try this. And getting these pathogens, once he gets to the World Health Organization, requires teamwork, collaborative intelligence, and skills, because half of the World Health Organization facility is infected with zombies, because while they were doing their testing, they got infected because they accidentally stabbed themselves with some blood, and everybody over there, like 83, 82 people, something like that. So the teamwork to get over there and get those pathogens, like malaria or measles or meningitis, something like that, some kind of deadly pathogen, they have to have topographical knowledge, the ability to maneuver and fight, willingness to achieve a common objective, and mutual trust with the people going over there. So 3 of them go over. And one of the guys who works at the World Health Organization tells the rest of his teammates, he's like, no matter what happens, when, after we close these doors, don't open them for anything, for any reason, if it's anything besides us coming back, That's the instruction. Well, is another example where that instruction immediately gets overrun, because there comes a time when they did what they have to do. They got Jerry where he needed to be. Now they're going to head back, and they're being chased by a bunch of these zombies. And so one guy says, we have to go open the doors to let him in. And the other guy says, but he said not to open the door. So that's almost like what this whole movie is really about. Do we follow the rules that were told to us, or do we overrule the rules because the situation is different than what was expected when the rule was given? That's really what it's all about. And the guy that decided to open the doors wins out. And if I had to pick an underlying theme, I don't even know if the director or the writer was aware of this, but the underlying theme of the movie seems to be the right time to overrule explicit orders. The right time to overrule or override explicit rules. During the Chronos, you follow these rules, or here's the guidance. And it's all about situations that demand that we override the guidance that was given. So individuals have to have individual empowerment, procedural knowledge. They are empowered to do something and to make decisions in spite of explicit guidance. And you have to know when to do it. And when this guy opens the door, lets them in, and they're able to shut it in time. So it works out. He saves the lives of the 2 people that are coming back, and everybody's fine. So it was good to override the guidance in that case. And there are times to override the guidance. Sometimes you steal the car. Sometimes you cut off the arm. Sometimes, that's the way that's kind of what this movie is really about to me, is people mainly the main character, but people who know when and how to make those decisions, and they're the right decisions when they make them. And I would say that little thing just about whether or not to open the door in spite of the guidance is an illustration that religious dogmatism is paralyzing, dead, and disastrous. And the spirit and intent is more important than the letter of the law. And you constantly should be reassessing the situation for the spirit and intent. You have to have a goal, right? You should constantly be reevaluating the situation for the spirit and intent rather than just, being paralyzed by the dogma and guidance itself. Don't be paralyzed by the guidance to inaction. Know when, how, and why to override it and for what reasons. Because when that presents itself, it's up to you. Nobody can teach that to you. Nobody can do that for you. You have to do that. And then we see that Jerry puts himself at risk to test his theory. And it winds up being successful. So in the resolution, Jerry's work leads to a vaccine which overturns the tide of the epidemic. Jerry's personal objective, which is reuniting with his family, is only possible and enjoyable once his role of helping everybody else is complete. Now, tragedy strikes every life, but individual action is required to stop the tragedy from turning into an absolute proverbial hell or from being as bad as it possibly could be. Individual action to stop the suffering or to create something better. So when you're watching videos and shows and narratives, look for a role, a character that is lying or where there is unknown information or misinformation, or there's ego attached to information that plays in the positive or negative flow of a narrative. If you watch the 24 series, there's a lot of that going on there. But lies, and there's not a whole lot of that in World War Z, really. Maybe there's some that I overlooked or something, but typically what I'm looking for is, I recently came to the understanding of the connection between lies and resentment, and then resentment being this reciprocal narrowing effect on the person where it causes them to be more susceptible to false narratives that that justify the resentment. And so lies and resentment grow on each other into this snowball effect from which the person cannot arise, and it becomes a trap. People become ideologically possessed and resentful and disgruntled in these ways. And it's very horrible. So I recommend that people watch out for those kinds of things. And the resentment, you could say that Satan is resentment personified, because it is the father of your desire and capacity to entertain and justify inaccuracies, if you will, things that bolster the resentment. And you want to feed that resentment, and you want it, you desire it. And that is those who are taken captive by the devil at his will. You're in that reciprocal narrowing cycle where you just can't get out, okay? And you can see that play out in dramas sometimes. So look for that. So what I want you and I to do is to prepare during the Chronos. And this isn't a Chronos societally. We're in a Kairos. But during the Chronos, prepare for the Kairos. During things that are normalized as much as possible, that's when you prepare both physically and psychologically and spiritually to operate appropriately during whatever Kairos presents itself. And I'm not a doomsday sayer or trying to be the bearer of bad news, but a lot of people are predicting that the corona thing is probably the first in a long string. A series of these things are coming, and this is mild compared to what's coming after this, okay? I don't know if that's true or not, but I suspect that we're due it, if you will, for a variety of reasons. So I wanted to walk through this movie with you. so that we could look at this character. It's a character study of somebody who knows when to break chronos rules when they're in a kairos. And that's what I want you to transform into. That when you have a goal, what should I aim for? Be a spiritual version of that kind of character. I need to know when to overturn the rules, when to overturn the explicit guidance in favor of something that better aligns with what the goal is for that situation. You need to be that person that is transformed into that. That's your aim. That's your goal. Okay. I have these notes here. Don't spend any time trying to convince anyone of the truth of unprovable propositions. Just act in the most appropriate manner with respect to the current situation and the objective. When plausible propositions do come into play, the character puts himself on the line in the form of acting it out and demonstrating its veracity. And that's at the end, when he's convinced that he thinks he might know the answer. He puts himself on the line. He embodies the risk of himself possibly being wrong, rather than trying to make everybody else follow. He doesn't just tell everybody to try this. He actually goes and embodies it himself. All right. A lot of people, when they think they're right, they just want everybody else to submit. You need to repent and get right because I'm right and you're wrong. No, just embody the truth you think is true. Emotional attachment to misinformation, propositional narratives is a culprit in any tragedy descending into a proverbial hell. Everyone has to have an explanation, and they are emotionally identified with it. And that's everyone. People, we are attached. We're addicted to certainty, if you will. You got to have that explanation. You got to have that explanation. And we emotionally identify. So that goes into our ideological possession stuff. And those were just some notes that I made on the side, kind of as I went. Think about this character. Think about what kind of aim you have in your life. You're transforming into something. What does that look like? What does the goal of what you have look like? And do you know the difference between a chronos and a kairos environment? And are you prepared to behave appropriately in the kairos? And I hope that we don't, I would like for the Christians listening to this to not be nostalgically attached to the way things were in American Christianity before this happened. This is an opportune time for something new and better to emerge that looks like the Ephesians 4 edification model can emerge out of this, or at least something more like it. We can move toward that as a result of this is an opportunity to, find out what we were doing in church that wasn't working and try to change some of those things and emerge from this changed. That's what I hope we do. And it's what I hope we do in every in every environment. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you get the spirit with which I'm saying this. I want everybody to get this Romans 12:2 transformation concept and the embodiment of the 4 types of knowing and what that aim can look like of making appropriate decisions in the midst of a kairos situation, even if they have to break all the explicit rules. And I hope you get the spirit of what I'm saying. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you, and good day.
study was good.
have somebody's experience as far as what they went through from a sociological standpoint, the practical aspects and implications of theology, and then what did he actually turn to and why. We're going to talk about some scripture. And so thanks for checking this out. But without further ado, praise I am just glad you're here. Before we start into the questions, why don't you give the audience a little bit about yourself, your ministry, anything you'd like to share before we dive into this?
Absolutely, Daniel. Thanks for having me, man. This has been this will be a blast. And yeah, so my channel is the name of the YouTube channel that I usually interact with people is called Praise I Am, and I usually have two gals, two sisters in Christ that join me, and we usually do reviews, and we usually open up rooms and have people come in and they can bring in their viewpoints and they can challenge the viewpoints that we usually put forth, which now is free grace. And we challenge atheists and other people that are non-believers of Christianity, try to draw them in, try to persuade them and to come to believe on the gospel. And it's an apologetics channel. Yeah.
Excellent. Now, I was just looking at one recently, and it looked like it was like a 7+ hour stream. Now, do you stream that all the way through, or what is that?
Yeah, well, it does. We just let it go, and whoever comes in there, and time flies fast when you're in these open hangouts. And I mean, I don't always say that. Sometimes I take breaks and stuff, bathroom breaks, and TV, or sometimes and let the other people talk. But they do go long, yeah. A lot of times, because there's just so many people that come in there and talk and share things, and that's kind of. I mean, and like any other place, like 7 hours, that would be so long and grueling. But it's on the channel; it goes fast. It's fun.
Man, that's a work day right there. That's a duty day.
A lot of people, yeah.
I love that though, man. I mean, there's not a whole lot of people that love talking theology for hours. I remember a buddy of mine, he's a pastor in Louisiana.
I don't mind discussing theology for hours and hours. But obviously you don't know anything about me, so.
Sienna, his name's Russell.
Only that 1 hour to sleep for then. Yeah, I'm fine. Can anybody hear me? How long was I asleep for?
Beyond the fundamental.
Oh, me? Yeah, it's live. How long ago? What time is it now? Oh, it's 11:30. Just talk, come in my side chat, dirty varmint, and start being rude with people about you. ideologically possessed. What he means by that is basically in a cult, a cult, a group mentality. That's all it means. I don't know, email in the mask. Kevin at beyondthefundamentals.com. Well, I'm back anyway. Well, I started streaming 3.5 hours ago. Which must have been, 9 o'clock. No, 8 o'clock. Yeah. Anyway, who's there still? Hello? Did I actually played that, so I must have left that going.
I was raised as a Catholic.
I don't listen to that stuff.
Welcome to Beyond the Fun.
But I did notice Jamie Russell creeping round this channel. I've seen him in a few places. Is anybody there? Oh, he's in a debate, isn't he? Yeah. I might go and watch it. I don't know what to play until then, though. But I've just posted the link in the side chat. Yeah, I think I'll end it here, and then I'll go and watch that. I can always start another stream anyway.